Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. Who organized a bloodbath in a quiet town? Almost any crime in a small, quiet town where everyone knows each other becomes a high-profile event that will be discussed for a long time. But if it is a brutal crime against an entire family, which has never happened before in these parts, then such stories very quickly grow all sorts of rumors, speculation, fictional gruesome details, and eventually turn into a real urban legend. In the fall of 2010, the small Australian town of Kapunda, with a population of only 3,000 people, located on the Light River near the Barossa Valley in South Australia, was shaken by the horrific news of the massacre of an entire family. Local law enforcers had never encountered anything like this before and therefore found themselves in a state of confusion. Rumors immediately spread around the city. Everyone retold the story in their own way so that the police even had to partially classify the case so as not to leak information and not to sow more panic. The dead family was well known and respected in the city. They had no enemies and ill-wishers, as it seemed to everyone at that time, and there was no motive for the crime at first glance either. What happened looked like a senseless bloodbath, and detectives even suggested that it was the work of some madman or maniac. It is noteworthy that the real culprit was not even initially included in the number of suspects and probably would have been able to get away with it if he had not accidentally given himself away. The story of the Rowe family. The head of the family, Andrew Rowe, was a native of England, where he was born in 1965. At the age of 3, he and his parents emigrated to Australia, where they decided to stay forever. The family settled in the suburbs of Adelaide, where the boy went to school. He, from an early age, was sociable, had a great sense of humor, and had a lot of friends, and also loved fishing with his father. After graduating from high school while studying in the capital of South Australia, Adelaide, a young man met the same cheerful girl named Rose, who was only a year younger than him. Between students quickly began a romantic relationship, and in 1985, they married, playing a modest wedding, which was attended only by their closest people. In 1987, the couple had their first child together, a boy, whom the happy young parents named Christopher, and in 1994 their daughter Chantal was born. The family settled in a quiet and cozy town, Kapunda, where they opened their own small business, founding a company that provided professional carpet cleaning services. Their business quickly took off, and the business brought in a good income, allowing the Rowe to do nothing to deny themselves. The children attended one of the local schools, where they studied well, and in high school began to work part-time, striving for self-sufficiency and financial independence. The eldest son was interested in music and practiced guitar, while the youngest daughter painted well, attended a dance studio, and played on the school basketball team. Chantal was described as a very kind, sympathetic girl, always ready to come to the aid of those who were in trouble. She dreamed of getting a law degree and becoming a lawyer, and her brother decided to connect his fate with programming and computer technologies. The children were very close to their parents, and in general their family was friendly, strong, and happy. In the summer of 2010, 23-year-old Christopher moved out of his parents' home and began living with his girlfriend in the same city, just a few blocks away from his family. And in late September of the same year, Chantal got a part-time job at a roadside cafe as a waitress. It was inconvenient for her to get to the workplace, so her father or brother drove her there. Since the girl was already 16 years old, she dreamed of passing her driver's license as soon as possible to drive a car. But these dreams, alas, were not destined to come true. On November 4, 2010, Christopher, together with his girlfriend, went on vacation to Brisbane, and soon after returning, young people planned to play a wedding. But on the 8th, after the young man was unable to reach any of his family members, he became very concerned. Chris called his father's office, and after learning that he did not go to work for an unknown reason and did not answer the phone, he realized that something bad had happened. So he called his friend and asked him to go to their house to see if everything was okay. A brutal massacre of a family. On November 8th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a patrol car pulled up to the Rowe family home. It is worth noting that at the time, The small-town police station had only 2 people working, and when they realized that they were dealing with a brutal triple crime, they immediately requested help from the administrative center. The picture of the crime was so shocking that even the experienced detectives who came from Adelaide said they had encountered nothing like it. The house inside looked like the set of a horror movie. There was blood everywhere, on the floor, walls, furniture, curtains, and even the ceiling. The breathless and badly disfigured bodies of 45-year-old Andrew and 44-year-old Rose lay in the kitchen, while Chantel's torn body lay on the bed in her room. All members of the family had suffered dozens of penetrating stab wounds, and had died long before police and paramedics arrived. Almost immediately, suspicions arose that the crime was of a personal nature, because nothing was missing from the house, nothing was searched, and valuable things, phones, laptop, expensive camera, and even money were lying in prominent places. It was also suggested that the killer was not alone, because it is not easy to cope with 3 adults. Either it was a tall, sturdy, and physically strong man. The detectives noticed that in some places the footprints had been ineptly washed and wiped, which led them to conclude that the perpetrator had attempted to hide the evidence, but soon gave up and abandoned the idea. There were also clear bloody shoe prints on the floor, heading towards the door, but suddenly breaking off, which could indicate that the perpetrator had taken off his shoes and left in socks. Another curious point is that there were no signs of forced entry. This could indicate that the victims either knew their perpetrator and let him into the house themselves, or he got in by some other means. The family, by all accounts, had no enemies or ill-wishers, and no one could even guess who and why the parents and daughter had been so brutally murdered. Several clear fingerprints were found on the door in the room of the murdered girl, but checking them against the police database yielded nothing. The person who left them had never previously come to the attention of law enforcers. He either did not commit offenses or went unpunished. The house was cordoned off as a crime scene, and the area was fenced off from prying eyes, as well as from the press representatives who arrived here. Almost immediately it was decided not to disclose details and not to spread the word about the investigation, so as not to scare the criminal and not let him lie low or escape. Nevertheless, rumors about the maniac quickly spread through the city. People became afraid to go out in the street at night, and locked their houses with all the locks and bolts. First suspects. As wild as it may sound, the first suspect was the only surviving family member, Christopher. At the time of the tragedy, he was in Queensland, where he was vacationing with his fiancée in Moreton Bay, on the Pacific coast. He was the first to sound the alarm when he discovered that his loved ones were out of contact, and took the first flight home when he learned the shocking news, but his alibi and fingerprints were checked first. However, he was immediately ruled out as a suspect, as he was indeed on the other side of the continent at the time of the crime. A curious fact was that the young girl, the perpetrator after the massacre, changed into clean clothes and laid on the bed. At the same time, there were bloody drag marks near the bed, which indicated that Chantel probably tried to hide from her executioner under the bed, but he pulled her out of there. In addition, forensic experts soon determined that she had been abused before her death. As noted earlier, it looked like the crime was very personal, and the perpetrator clearly had a grudge against the victims, hence such senseless cruelty. The head of the family received 36 stab wounds, and his wife was stabbed 50 times all over her body, and judging by the traces, she was attacked twice, but after the first attack she managed to survive, and she even tried to call for help. On the body of the girl, forensic experts counted 33 stab wounds. In addition, she was abused. The police immediately began to find out whether the deceased was in a relationship, whether she was dating someone, and whether she had obsessive fans. It soon became known that the girl had been dating a guy named Dylan for about a year, with whom they went to the same school. The young man was also 16 years old, and the detectives doubted that such a brutal crime could have been committed by this young guy. Nevertheless, they needed to talk to him, check his alibi, and get his opinion as to who might have wanted to harm his girlfriend and her loved ones. Dylan willingly agreed to cooperate with the police and told them everything he knew. According to him, he and Chantel had a wonderful relationship. They loved each other, and were going to get married as soon as they became adults. The death of his beloved girl was a huge shock for him, and he simply did not know how to live on. At the time of the massacre of the Rowe family, the guy was in a neighboring city on the anniversary of his grandfather, and his alibi could confirm dozens of people. The young man has also been ruled out as a suspect, searching for evidence and witnesses. So the police had fingerprints of the criminal, as well as his seminal fluid found on the body of the deceased Chantel, from which they managed to extract DNA, but it also did not appear in the police database. Notably, the family was massacred with carving knives that the perpetrator removed from a stand in their own kitchen. This could indicate that the crime was not planned in advance, and could have been spontaneous. The murder weapons themselves could not be found at the scene, so the murderer took them with him when he left. Experts determined that the victims were killed between midnight and 2 a.m. One of Rose's neighbors admitted that around 1 a.m., he heard Rose call for help twice, and then there was a thud, as if something heavy had fallen, and then everything went quiet. He thought it was strange, but he did not call the police, deciding that it was just a simple domestic quarrel between the couple, and he should not interfere in their family affairs. No strangers were seen near their house that evening. Police officers were carefully combing the area around the house looking for evidence or instruments of crime. It was also decided to reach out to the residents of the town through the media, and encourage them to share any information that could help the investigation move forward in the case. But this approach rather made the detectives' job more difficult. Almost immediately, the police began to receive dozens of calls from concerned people who wanted to help, and all the information received had to be verified. Callers reported suspicious people, cars, tried to connect what happened with a gang of bikers, with drug dealers, and even reported suspicious posts on social networks found in the profiles of local residents. However, all the incoming information did not help law enforcement officers. 2 days before the tragedy, among the things in the house was found an expensive camera that belonged to the dead girl. As it turned out, Chantel was fond of photography, and detectives assumed that there may be pictures that would help the investigation. There were indeed many photos on the memory card, but the last ones interested the police most of all. It turned out that 2 days before the tragedy, on November 6th, in the house of Roe was a friendly party, which was organized by Chantel. Her parents that day left with a sleepover to relatives, and she decided to take advantage of their absence. But it should be noted that it wasn't some kind of party with alcohol or something worse, but quite decent and quiet, sitting over watching movies and cooking dinner on the barbecue. Chantel had only invited her boyfriend and 3 of her best friends with their other halves, so there were only 8 people in the house. That evening, the hostess of the house took a lot of pictures that captured their good time. Some of the photos of the guests present that same evening published on their pages in social networks, noting friends there. All the friends stayed the night at the house Roe, and returned in the morning. Andrew and Rose even cooked breakfast for the guests, having a sit-down in the backyard. Detectives decided that it was necessary to interview all the people who were present at that party, to find out whether the girl had enemies, envious or stalkers, as well as to take everyone's fingerprints to compare with the samples found on the door of the room of the deceased. Chantel's friends still couldn't believe what had happened. They tried their best to help the investigation, and showed up at the station to testify at the first call. The boys provided their fingerprints and DNA samples, but they did not match those found at the crime scene. They also allowed access to their social media pages and phones, and they also detailed all the events that took place at what turned out to be the last party. Dylan recalled that on Sunday, his girlfriend complained that she was not feeling well and probably had a cold. In the evening, she had developed a fever and realized that she couldn't go to work the next day, so she had called her boss and warned him about it. The next morning, around 5 o'clock, the guy texted her and asked how she was feeling. He saw the message light up as read, but Chantel never responded. The guy did not know that at that time his beloved and her parents were already dead, and the message was read by the criminal. Moreover, the police found out that the criminal even tried to write a reply text message, but since Chantel forgot to recharge her account, the message never went away. Nevertheless, the perpetrator tried to create the illusion that young Roe was still alive. Unexpected suspect. Dylan and several close friends of the deceased helped police officers compile a list of all the people in Chantel's entourage with whom she had been in contact. Law enforcement began working their way down that list, talking to and checking out everyone listed there. After about a week, they reached a certain 18-year-old young man named Jason Downey. He had previously attended the same high school as the deceased and her boyfriend, but had graduated last year and was now working at a local auto repair shop. Initially, Jason didn't raise any suspicions at all. He was of average height, very thin, even skinny, and looked completely harmless. They planned to just interrogate him and let him go, but the young man began to behave strangely. Instead of answering the standard questions asked, he started complaining that Chantel didn't invite him to her party because everyone there was in pairs and he didn't have a girlfriend. And afterward, he claimed that he had an alibi for the night of the crime, although no one had even asked him about it. The behavior of the guy seemed very suspicious to the law enforcers, and therefore it was decided to check him to the fullest extent, including fingerprinting and taking a DNA sample. Hearing about this, Downey did not show any excitement or concern, and simply agreed to undergo all the necessary procedures. At this point, the police again doubted his guilt, but still decided to follow through with the test. When the expert took the guy's fingerprints, he noticed relatively fresh, deep cuts on his palms. Jason explained that he had hurt himself on the job at the machine shop, but all the cuts looked smooth, as if they had been made with a thin, sharp tool. The test results showed that it was Downey's prints that were found on the dead woman's bedroom door. For the full picture, all we had to do was wait for the DNA test results, which were due in 2 days. In the meantime, they decided to talk to the guy again and ask him how his fingerprints ended up in the house of the deceased, if he had not been present at the party the night before. The suspect again looked perfectly calm and explained that he had visited Rose's house with Dylan about a month and a half ago and had probably left fingerprints there. But this version did not correspond to reality, because the prints were fresh and clear, they were not dusty, they were not smudged or rubbed, which would have happened to them over such a long period of time. And on November 16, 2010, the DNA results came back from the lab, dispelling any last doubts. It was Jason who had abused the girl that night and taken her life as well as that of her parents. But why would he do that to her? And where did this scrawny young man get his strength and rage? He was arrested the same day, and now the detectives had to find out what moved this man, and what was the motive for such a brutal massacre of the family. Who is Jason Downey? Jason Downey was born in September 1992 in the Scottish town of Kilmarnock, where he spent his childhood and early adolescence. He was the youngest of 2 children in the family, and was raised with his own older brother Jamie. His parents divorced when the boy was only 8 months old, and from then on he was raised by his mother Lorraine. His father soon remarried, and the brothers had a half-sister Judy, with whom, however, they practically did not communicate. When Jason was 13 years old, they emigrated with his mother and brother to Australia, and settled in the town of Kapunda. In the new place, the woman married for the second time to a local resident, whom she had previously met through the internet. The boy, who grew up in a big city, did not like it here at all. He literally hated provincial life, and dreamed of getting out of here. Jason had almost no friends at school. He was considered strange, and they talked to him more out of pity. He was overly talkative, self-assured, and constantly lied, telling everyone what a talented athlete he was, how popular he was, and how many admirers he had. In reality, girls ignored him. No one wanted to get involved with this odd and ugly young man. Dylan and Jason played on the same basketball team, and Dylan felt sorry for Jason because almost no one wanted to be friends with him. He started inviting him to various friendly gatherings, and even introduced him to his girlfriend Chantel, which turned out to be a fatal mistake. Chantel also communicated with Downey out of politeness and pity, because he was a friend of her boyfriend, and she also a couple of times stood up for him in front of other teenagers who tried to insult him. However, her desire to help a hurt and hounded boy led Jason to fall madly in love with her. Moreover, he began to think that she has the same feelings for him, but because of Dylan cannot say it openly. Over time, teenage crush transformed into a real obsession, but others did not notice it, as Downey became more and more immersed in his fantasies, in which he was happy with Chantel. The girl never gave him hope or made any ambiguous hints, but only tried to be polite and friendly. She just happened to be the only one who was kind to him, and he mistook it for love. The arrest and the first interrogation, when the last doubts that Jason had committed the triple crime were dispelled. The law enforcers realized that the arrest could not be delayed, but they did not know how best to do it, because they were afraid that the guy might not have done something. Everyone knew exactly what he was capable of, so they decided to lure him to the station under a harmless pretext. As soon as the suspect arrived, handcuffs were snapped on his wrists. Surprisingly, the guy showed no emotion at all. He wasn't surprised, scared, or angry. He was completely calm. Downey denied all the accusations and tried his best to get out of it. He insisted that he left his fingerprints when he visited the house a month and a half ago, and when the guy was asked how his DNA ended up on the body and inside the deceased, he said that at the same time during his visit they had consensual intimacy. Of course, this could not be true, because seminal fluid could not have remained on the body for so long, neither inside nor outside. As for the suspect's alibi, he stated that he had an argument with his mother and stepfather in the evening, after which he went to sleep in the car. The parents confirmed the fact of the quarrel, but no one knew where Jason went afterward. The police also managed to find out that in the evening, November 7th, he called Dylan, from whom he learned that Chantel was sick and would stay home on Monday. Apparently, it was after this conversation that he decided to go to Rose's house. Around the same time, police were able to locate a pair of shoes discarded in a deserted area with traces of blood on them. The sole prints matched the marks at the crime scene. The shoes showed traces of blood from all three victims, and inside were Downey's own sweat, reconstructing the timeline of events. When Jason realized that the evidence against him is too much and it is useless to defend himself, he decided to confess to the murder and agreed to cooperate with the investigation in order to avoid the most severe punishment. However, he tried to minimize his guilt in every possible way. He even promised to show the place where he threw the crime tools, but there were no knives there. Most likely, the guy was just lying. That evening, he really quarreled with his mother and stepfather, after which he left home, intending to spend the night in the car. However, after a phone conversation with Dylan, Jason became obsessed with seeing Chantel. Initially, he planned to just drive up to her house and stare blankly through the windows, as he had done so many times before, but it was dark indoors. Then the guy drove the car to the end of the street, returned back on foot, and sneaked into the house through a small window in the bathroom, which the owners left open. As he was very thin, he succeeded without difficulty. He sat in the bathroom for about half an hour, listening to the sounds to make sure everyone had gone to bed. The suspect then headed to Chantel's bedroom to, he said, confess his feelings to her. But why he took the knife from the kitchen with him if he was going to confess his love, the guy could not explain. According to the police, Jason initially planned to abuse the object of his lust by threatening her with a knife, but she naturally resisted. During the attack, he wounded her several times, and the victim tried to hide from her tormentor under the bed. Her parents woke up from the noise, but they did not have time to get to their daughter's room, as the perpetrator jumped out in front of them. The guy was literally mad at the sight of blood. He attacked Andrew, quickly stabbing him in the neck and chest area. Then he knocked Rose to the ground and stabbed her a dozen times until the woman lost consciousness. Downey then returned to Chantel's room, pulled her out from under the bed, took advantage of her, and then finished her off with the knife in cold blood. Why he changed his victim into clean clothes, he was never able to explain. In the meantime, the miraculously surviving woman managed to get to the back door and even managed to call for help twice before the perpetrator caught up with her, and finished her off with a second knife, which he snatched from the same stand. After massacring the family, the guy made an attempt to clean up the house, but quickly abandoned the idea because there was too much blood. He realized that he had made a mess, so he took off his bloody shoes and left the scene in just his socks. He took the knives with him and disposed of them in such a way that they were never found. Trial and sentencing. Jason's trial began only in the fall of 2011, almost a year after his crime. At the trial, the guy behaved absolutely calmly, did not express any emotions, but constantly changed his testimony. He claimed that he was in shock, that he did not remember killing the Rowe family, and kept repeating that he loved Chantel and did not want to hurt her. It is noteworthy that after the massacre, he took with him the victim's pendant, which was later found in his room during a search, and the chain from the pendant was in the glove compartment of his car. At trial, he recounted again that Chantel had not invited him to a party she had thrown at her house the night before because he did not have a date. Allegedly, he was very upset that he had been ignored, and noted that the tragedy might not have happened if Chantel had called him then. The defendant testified with a completely impartial face, and in a phone conversation he told his brother that he pleaded guilty to avoid a life sentence. That is, Jason was not remorseful at all, but only wanted to receive a lighter sentence. However, he managed to get his way. On April 19, 2012, Downey was found guilty of a triple crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with the possibility of qualifying for parole after 35 years. During the announcement of the sentence, not a single muscle on his face did not tremble. He remained as calm and impartial as if it was not about him, but about someone else. If he had not pleaded guilty, he would have been eligible for release after 45 years. Christopher Rowe considered the punishment just, although he noted that no court could take away his pain and bring his family back to life. In memory of his parents and sister, he made tattoos with their names. Finally, I would like to add that Christopher is currently married, and together with his wife, they are raising their son, Kobe. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. Think of a scene from any movie in which the protagonist is running away from pursuit, but in the last seconds, when he is already safe, the villain's foot stops the closing door and the protagonist turns into a vulnerable victim. A young woman's morning began like this scene. She found herself trapped. We all know that in a state, law must always prevail. Not religion, not tradition, but the defense of human rights and freedom. However, some attitudes formed many years ago and stereotypes from childhood imposed by society affect the woman, and under the influence of unspoken rules, she continues to live with a tyrant and tolerates violence. Today, our reality is such that even in the modern world, these attitudes are still relevant and continue to change people's lives. Today, we will move to Central Asia, namely to Kyrgyzstan, and look at the customs and lives of people of the state with the oldest history. Kyrgyzstan is a country rich in natural beauty. After all, 3/4 of the country are mountains. Almost all of its territory is located within 2 mountain systems. The overwhelming majority of believers in Kyrgyzstan are Muslims. There are Christians, Orthodox, Catholics, and various Protestant movements. At the same time, Kyrgyzstan is a secular state. It is a state with a system where religion is separated from state power, and which is regulated on the basis of civil rather than religious norms. The country's authorities punish members of the clergy for performing religious rituals that contradict the laws of the republic. But in the case of one fragile young woman, who begged for help from the state and asked for protection, the authorities showed complete indifference. Asal Nagelbieva was born in 1986 in the city of Tokmak, Chu Oblast, Kyrgyzstan. After finishing school, the girl finished hairdressing courses and moved to Bishkek to find a job in a salon. It is easy to get lost in a large city, but sometimes it is much easier to meet people there. One day, Azamat Estebazov came to the hairdresser's shop where Asal worked to get a new haircut. He liked the pretty slender girl very much, and he invited her for a cup of fragrant coffee. The meeting became fateful for both of them. After all, Azamat also liked Asal very much. He seemed to be a simple, attentive man who was brought up in a prosperous family and was very hardworking. Asal's family approved of her daughter's choice because Azamat was very religious and honored Muslim traditions. Asal's parents did not see the disadvantages of the groom, and with a calm heart blessed the marriage. At the age of 19, Asal married her beloved Azamat. Soon the firstborn child was born in the young family. A boy. It would seem that every man dreams of an heir, of someone who will continue the family. But in our story, the joy of fatherhood, as if a genie from a jug, caused the lowly and cruel demons of Azamat. So, on an ordinary evening, a simple family story turned into a real drama, which provoked a whole series of sad events. Asal and Azamat were bathing their son. The inexperienced father accidentally poured too much water on the child. He shook with fright and cried a lot. Asal reacted rudely and shouted at her husband. Azamat did not hesitate to hit her in the face in response. That same evening, Asal and the child went to her mother's house. Azamat repented and asked for forgiveness. He begged and said that this would never happen again. It is worth noting that the Kyrgyz mentality is very different from other mentalities. From childhood, girls are taught patience. A husband should be alone for the rest of his life because divorce is not welcomed, although it is not forbidden, and the Muslim religion plays an important role in creating and preserving a family by any means. Knowing the traditions and customs of the Turkic family, Asıl, who herself grew up without a father, did not want her son to repeat her fate. The girl believed that Azamat raised his hand for the first and last time, and they would be able to continue living happily. Asıl came back, but she was mistaken. A year later, the family returned from Bishkek to her Turkmak to live near her parents. The return was joyful because Asıl was expecting her second child. Asıl was walking with her son on the playground near her home and met several classmates. They said hello and had a nice conversation. However, returning home from the walk, Asıl again received a strong blow to the face. The blow was so strong that she fell and slipped on the linoleum. Unfortunately, this blow and fall triggered a miscarriage. After moving to Turkmak, Azamat became Asıl's shadow. He stealthily followed her on the street. He was constantly looking for a reason for new conflicts. The man got a taste for it and could no longer refrain from beating her. Only his outer shell remained of the kind and attentive Azamat, although Asıl had changed because his gaze was filled with anger and hatred. Asıl has resigned herself to living under total control for the sake of her children. After all, she had another son again. The beatings did not stop for years. Asıl's mother, knowing about her daughter's family drama, could not stand it and took her to her home. But the man did not stop. He came again and again for his family and begged for forgiveness, promising that this would not happen again. Tradition intervened again because in Kyrgyzstan, a son must grow up with his father. Such are the rules. Asıl ended up going back 5 times. Life became a nightmare for Asıl and she was tired of enduring it. After each day of painful beatings, she went to the police in the hope of getting help. But there is no criminal sentence for domestic violence in Kyrgyzstan. The maximum that was applied to Azamat was 3 days in the isolation center. Then he came back again and this nightmare continued over and over again for 6 years. Azamat did not even want to hear about divorce. He threatened that if his wife filed for divorce, he would find her, the children and her family and kill them all. During the period of the worst beatings, Asıl's family took her to Italy. In Italy, Asıl had big plans. She settled in with her brother who helped her find a job. She worked 3 jobs, a nurse, a cleaner, and she walked dogs. The woman worked without weekends to save money for an apartment, to become financially independent, and to leave her tyrant husband. After 3.5 years, she had already saved enough money to buy an apartment and open a mini business. During the years in Italy, Asıl saw a lot of new things. She communicated with interesting people and gradually her moral state recovered. But her maternal heart ached for her children. After all, she had to leave them for long 3 years for the sake that they had a bright future ahead of them. The woman knew that the father never beat the children and did not show aggression towards them, so she was calm about it. But when she returned from Italy, a bleak picture awaited her. The children were living in terrible conditions. In one small room they slept, ate, played, and even went to the bathroom. The children did not go to school or for walks. They didn't eat well. And again, tradition. Azamat raised real Turkic men and created truly harsh conditions for their existence. Instead of school, they attended a madrasa, a Muslim religious and educational institution, where they learn religion and how to read the Quran. Asıl took the children. Azamat did not mind. It would seem that she was saved from the cruel captivity. But Azamat began to pursue his Asıl again. He called and offered to meet her. Asıl was categorical and made it clear that in case of harassment she would file a police report. But this did not stop him. In the evening, Asıl went to the store to get some dishwashing detergent. The store was very close by. On her way she met Azamat, who was following her again. He grabbed her and threatened her with a knife and took her to a dark, remote place. There, right on the street, he brutally beat Asıl and took advantage of her. The strange sounds were noticed by passers-by who called the police. On September 1st, 2022, Asıl wrote a statement to the police on her ex-husband about rape. He was detained and a criminal case was opened. Asıl's family was sure that he would go to trial and the torment for all of them would end. But no. Azamat's family became active and could not accept that their son was a tyrant. Azamat's mother and sisters repeatedly begged Asıl to withdraw the application. Another strange tradition. A woman in Kyrgyzstan cannot report her husband because it is a great shame. To beat, humiliate and rape a woman is not shameful. Azamat's relatives discouraged Asıl as much as they could. By deception they succeeded. Asıl took back the application, in exchange for Azamat's application for relinquishment of parental rights. But he is still officially their father. The Sokolov District Court dismissed the case because of the victim's counter-application and reconciliation of the parties. After being released, Azamat started a new wave of harassment and threats. He wrote daily threatening messages to Asıl, changed phone numbers to relentlessly continue his pressure. He openly said in voice messages that if he caught Asıl, he would kill her. He waited for her in the driveway. He waited for her at work. He followed her everywhere. For 3 months, Asıl's relatives took turns living with her and her children, protecting her from Azamat's attacks. But this did not save the woman from the second violence. On January 31, 2023, the woman went to the police again and reported that her ex-husband had again taken advantage of her by using force. A criminal case was also opened and the suspect was detained. After the investigation, the materials were sent to the court. The family was waiting for the decision and expected a real term of at least 5 years. On the day when the trial was to take place, the judge and 2 prosecutors invited Asıl to a separate office. Azamat was there. In front of her eyes, they took off his handcuffs, informing him that they applied 3 years of probation instead of 5 years of imprisonment. In fact, he remained free. The court considered such a decision appropriate because Azamat has an elderly mother with a disability and 2 children from his marriage to the victim. Let me clarify that probation is a set of measures applied to convicted persons. The purpose of probation is to correct behavior and prevent the commission of new crimes. Asıl was crying. She felt herself driven into the darkest corner from which there was no escape. Despair and fear once again confidently settled in the woman's life. But Asıl did not wait for new attacks. She no longer believed anyone and did not listen to Azamat's relatives. Asıl took down all the beatings. She hired a lawyer and filed an appeal with the Chu Regional Court. The lawyers provided the court with all the threats in the messages, all the voice messages. And this time the case went to court. But a series of different events constantly postponed the hearing, bringing closer the worst day of Asıl. First, the lawyer fell ill and the trial was postponed for a month. The second and third hearings were also postponed for inexplicable reasons. At the 4th hearing, Asıl begged not to postpone the hearing any longer because she was afraid not of beatings but of death. Azamat continued to walk around freely and make attempts on Asıl's life. On the eve of the meeting, he sent her a photo of a black backpack with a knife and a rope, with the caption, "I am ready to meet you," at the bottom. But due to Azamat's refusal of the state lawyer and the involvement of a private lawyer in the case was again postponed indefinitely. With such indifference of justice and law enforcement agencies, Asıl simply had no chance to save herself. September 20th, 2023 began as usual. At 6:30 a.m., Asıl woke up her children. They had breakfast together, and the caring mother accompanied her eldest son to school, wishing him a good day. Asıl was about to leave the house too, so she didn't close the door, finishing getting ready. She brushed her hair as the front door suddenly opened. Azamat came in very quickly and very aggressively. The woman did not have time to react and close herself in the bathroom. He immediately hit her twice on the head, after which Asıl fell into a stupor of incomprehension about what was happening. After the blows on her head, the pervert grabbed her by the throat and started strangling her. Asıl lost consciousness, nothing further. Asıl lay unconscious. Sometimes she heard Azamat's voice, and it seemed to her that everything that was happening was a terrible dream. But the strong crying of her son brought her back to reality. Asıl realized that she was awake. The boy covered himself with a blanket and crying repeated, "Daddy, don't do it." But his father ordered to keep silent. Otherwise he would slaughter him too. Asıl did not remember how from the bathroom, where she tried to hide, she found herself in the kitchen. He threw the unfortunate woman to the floor like an unnecessary thing, then picked her up again and continued to abuse her. In a moment, the pervert had lifted Assel up again and leaned her against the wall and was stabbing her face and neck with a clerical knife in cold blood. The next time Assel regained consciousness, she looked around and saw that everything was covered in blood. But she didn't realize what was happening. She had lost a lot of blood, and her throat was dry. She kept asking for a drink. Her once beloved husband brought her a bucket of rags, and in it was water mixed with blood. The giver had gotten so into the taste of blood that he started picking out a knife. He went through all the kitchen knives and tried them on, choosing the one that would reach Assel's heart. But suddenly the door opened, and police officers entered the house. It turned out that a neighbor from downstairs heard the screams, and knowing about the difficult situation of Assel and her ex-husband called the police, which saved her life by stopping the horrible torture. Azamat Estebazov resisted and attacked the officers with a knife. In such turmoil, no one realized what had happened. The whole apartment was drenched in blood. Azamat started cutting Assel in the bathroom, then dragged her to the kitchen through the hallway. He cut off his ex-wife's nose and ears and inflicted multiple wounds on her face and neck. He cut her throat, slashed her face, and beat her very badly. The district police officers arrived and called an ambulance. After assessing Assel's appearance, they began to look for the cut organs in a hurry, but they were nowhere to be found. Would you be surprised to know where they found the woman's ears and nose? In the monster's pocket. In pursuit of lost time, the police officers took Assel by their car to the 4th City Hospital in Bishkek. But there they did not provide her with first aid, explaining that according to her propiska, she did not belong to their hospital. Not only the doctors did not provide the victim with first aid, but they did not even stop the bleeding. Only in the 2nd hospital, she received first aid and stopped bleeding. She was then sent to the National Hospital, where she was operated on for 9 hours. 6 doctors worked meticulously to restore Assel's face. The found amputated organs were carefully delivered by the district police officers. The doctors meticulously collected everything, as the earlobes and nerve nodes were completely severed. Azamat did it with a special knife. It was very delicate work. The nose was also completely cut off. In the hospital, Assel did not regain consciousness for a long time. She miraculously survived. Psychologists warned that recovery would be long, and it would be very dangerous. The young, beautiful woman was disfigured. A criminal case under the article causing grave harm to health of the Criminal Code of the Kyrgyz Republic was initiated on the fact of the attack. The police detained the suspect in the commission of the crime. He was sent to a pretrial detention center. On September 27, 2023, the sentence against Azamat Estebazov was changed to 8 years of imprisonment. By presidential decree, 9 judges were dismissed from their posts. Among them is the judge of Sokolok District Court of Chu Region, Kielbek, Takhto Mamatov, who released the man under probation supervision. The decree of the head of state says that Takhto Mamatov was dismissed in connection with the violation of the requirements of impeccable behavior of a judge. In addition to him, Sadar Japarov, by decree of November 1st, at the suggestion of the Council of Judges, prematurely terminated the powers of a number of judges who in one way or another violated the requirements of impeccability. 6 investigators were involved in further investigation of the incident. They brought up all the previous cases of Azamat Estebazov and studied them again. They took into account all the facts they found, and on them in the new indictment case, there were already 11 articles. At the end of December 2023, all investigative activities were completed, and on January 9, 2024, the first court hearings began. Azamat Estebazov did not admit guilt on any of the 11 episodes charged against him. He avoided answering the judge's questions in every possible way, and in some cases stated that he was possessed by a demon, so he could not speak. He behaved aggressively towards the witnesses, because of which the trial was postponed. On January 26, 2024, the final closed court session was held. Judge Telekal Katarkalova, taking into account all the details of such a complex case, sentenced Azamat Estebazov to 20 years of imprisonment without the right to apply probation. He must also pay 2 million sums to his ex-wife, and a fine of 80,000 sums to the state. The judge decided to count 1 day spent in pretrial detention center for 2. In spring, the defendant filed an appeal, but the sentence of 20 years imprisonment remained unchanged. Asal Noguebiva noted that she would go further and demand that the former spouse be sentenced to life imprisonment, and all those involved in encouraging his actions be publicly removed from office and punished. Let this be an example to everyone. I want no woman in Kyrgyzstan to endure the pain that I and my family are carrying. Thank you all who do not stand by. The victim concluded. Asal Noguebiva's family and activists asked that her ex-husband be given a life sentence. After all, despite the imprisonment, Azamat continued to text threats to Asal, with a warning that he would still go out and find her. The case of Asal Noguebiva, about the powerlessness of a woman before the law of the country, and how a once loved and loving person turns into a cold-blooded monster in an instant, has finally come to its conclusion under the law. This case caused a wide public resonance throughout Kyrgyzstan. Asal's sister, Diana Yelkin, appealed to MPs to pass a law on domestic violence. She said that if the MPs do not pass a law on domestic violence, she will make them look at Asal's face without bandages, and think what one wrong decision is worth. Asal's sister published a petition asking for a life sentence without parole for her sister's ex-husband. She recalled that her sister divorced her husband 5 years ago because of beatings and inadequate behavior of her spouse, but he did not leave her alone even after the divorce, stalking, beating, and abusing her. Azamat Estebazov is a dangerous person for society. People like him should not live free. They are obsessive and manic people. People like him should be behind bars. We ask for a life sentence for this monster. He has already killed a seal morally. He mutilated her face in front of her young son. People like him should be sentenced for life without the right to parole. She appeals in the petition. It doesn't matter what country it happened in. Family violence often takes monstrous forms. The topic of domestic violence should unite all women of the world. And we should not forget that religion is not an indicator that a person is adequate. Now Asal has a new life. Her new identity brings her great suffering. Despite the fact that Asal's wounds are gradually healing, full recovery of hearing and breathing functions will be long. In her interview, Asal told how she saw her face for the first time after the tragedy. There were no mirrors in my room, since I was not allowed to look at myself. It was a day off. My doctors were not there along with the doctor on duty, so I went to the first floor for dressing. I had my bandages removed and there was a metal operating lamp. The doctor on duty had not put it away. I saw myself in the reflection. I'm afraid of myself. I can't look at myself in the mirror. I could already see my ears. From the shock, I lost consciousness. 2 weeks later, Asal saw her face completely. Her brother gave her a dressing at home. All the mirrors in the house were removed in advance, except for one mirror in the bathroom, because it could not be removed. When her brother left for 3 seconds, Asal quickly stood up and decided to look at herself. After seeing her reflection, she fainted. She had a very strong hysteria. Azil said that no one should ever see such ugliness. But the restoration of Asal's face is still ahead of her. Before the plastic surgery, she will have several operations to reconstruct her face, restore the frame of her ears and nose. These are surgeries that require long preparation, skin augmentation, and a long recovery period of at least a year. Also, Asal has lost her hearing by 20%, which will definitely be corrected as well. The difficulty is that these operations are not performed in Kyrgyzstan. Such complex operations are carried out in Turkey or in other countries, and this requires very large funds. Mikhail Shur, a plastic surgeon from Turkey, offered to perform the surgery free of charge, that is to cover all the costs. At first, Kyrgyz doctors told him that Asal had only the tip of her nose, but when Shur saw the woman's face without bandages, he was extremely shocked. It turned out that plastic surgery alone would not do the trick in this case. First, a whole series of operations to restore organs was needed. The surgery to restore the ears and nose of Asal Noguebiva, who was mutilated by her ex-husband, will cost at least $45,000. Asal's sister, Diana Yelkin, who is actively engaged in disseminating information and raising funds for the operation, noted that all complex operations will be carried out in Turkey. Unfortunately, we have not raised even half of the needed $45,000. In addition, there are other expenses for accommodation, psychologist, rehabilitation, interpreter, medicines, and so on, Diana Yelkin said. I have more pictures of her without bandages. They are very scary. They are not for the faint of heart. I have been unable to come to my senses since yesterday. And I can't accept this face because there is nothing left of her ears and nose. Thank you to the doctors. They did everything they could. The main thing is that sepsis and gangrene did not go, said the sister of the victim. Diana Yelkin notes that if they cannot raise the necessary amount of money in the near future, she will publish her sister's face without bandages. Let the whole world see the true face of lawlessness, the true face of a victim of violence. Let every judge, policeman, deputy hang a picture of the mutilated Asel and look at her photo before making the necessary decisions. Laws. If a year ago the judge had not given probation to this monster, all this would not have happened. The family and Asel were hoping for the law, for independent judges. Now we are making a challenge to everyone. A challenge to the judiciary of Kyrgyzstan. Diana regularly organized events to draw the attention of the public to the problem of domestic violence against women. So far, fundraising has been held to help restore Asel Nogoybeva's health. Asel's support, despite the terrible ordeal she endured, is an example of courage and determination in the fight against violence. Asel, who herself has yet to recover mentally and physically from 12 years of beatings, dreams of opening a foundation to help women who have also been abused like herself. After being abused, you can't stop helping others. To conclude the story, the real ugliness that no one should see is not Asel's face at all, but the essence of her ex-husband. Even with fatigue and pain in her eyes, one can see that Asel is a very feminine, gentle, and beautiful woman. It does not matter how her face looks now. She is a beautiful woman, because her soul and heart are beautiful. I would like to appeal to all women. Never tolerate and do not expect your chosen one to change, run away, and never come back. All nations have tyrants. A mysterious disappearance. According to sad statistics, one person disappears every 3 minutes in the world, and it happens everywhere. Often people are found, sometimes found dead. However, it also happens that they are never reported. Despite the hoax, most disappearances are linked to criminal events or accidents. Another mysterious story took us to Namyangju City in South Korea. On June 6, 2006, 29-year-old student Lee Yoon-hee disappeared without a trace. It would seem that nothing is unusual. People often disappear. However, this case is still stirring the minds of the public. Many people to this day continue to argue and put forward their own versions of what happened. Disappearance for the first time about the fact that the girl disappeared, spoke on June 7. The alarm was raised by her friends and classmates. Lee did not come to the university for the last classes, which was very unlike her. She was a responsible and efficient student and had never missed a class before. After studying, Lee's friend Min wanted to check on her and went to her house. However, after ringing the doorbell, no one opened the door. Then she didn't bother and left. Later in an interview, the girl admitted that she decided that Yoon-hee wanted to be alone and had a day off. It so happened that her acquaintance had been haunted by a series of troubles lately. Therefore, it was possible that she needed time to get away. However, on June 8, she didn't show up again. This time, Min went with Kim, Lee's friend, and 2 other guys to the missing person's house. There was no other way to contact her. It so happened that a week before the described events, the main character's purse was stolen, and together with her purse, Idaho card, and cell phone. When young people knocked on the door, the dog reacted to the noise from inside. The dog barked loudly, but there was no response from the owner. Since Yoon-hee's door had a digital lock, only someone who knew the code could open it. No one present had such information, so Min called the older sister of the wanted woman. But unfortunately, she hadn't heard from her sister and didn't know the code to the door. All this only added to the excitement. Eventually, it was decided to contact the police. Law enforcement officers contacted the owner of the apartment and asked him to come to open the door. Upon entering the student's residence, everyone immediately smelled a foul odor. Life story: Lee Yoon-hee was a pretty and colorful girl. She originally studied fine arts and statistics at a women's university in Seoul. However, after graduation, she realized that she had the wrong path. Since childhood, the protagonist loved animals, and even as an adult has 2 dogs for which she took care of with pleasure. Along with the craving for art, she liked to watch documentaries about nature, visit zoos, farms, and animal shelters. Therefore, having received a diploma, she was not afraid to start from the beginning and finally decided. At the age of 25, the girl decided to connect life with veterinary medicine. Parents did not immediately support their daughter. The traditional family believed that at such an age, it was time for her to get married and have children. However, Lee was a modern girl, so she wanted to build a career for a start. Therefore, in 2003, she entered the higher school of veterinary medicine. The new specialty liked the student and was given easily. At the same time, in order to be independent, she began to work part-time. Lately, the girl has been tutoring younger students, as well as children of teachers. In 2006, when the study was coming to an end, Lee was preparing for final exams. It is understandable that trying to combine study and work, she was very tired, but circumstances demanded it. A robbery on June 2nd, Lee was returning home after a private class. She was walking at a slow pace, absorbed in her thoughts. Suddenly, 2 men on a motorcycle sped past her at breakneck speed. As she recovered from her fright, the student realized that the intruders had stolen her purse. Several witnesses to the incident tried to help and went after them. Their van managed to chase the motorcycle for a while. However, once the thieves turned down a narrow alley, the chase had to be called off. The culprits were not punished, and Yoon-hee was left without her important belongings. After that, she warned everyone she knew that she would be out of touch for a while. The girl was so upset that she told her friend, "I can't believe the world can be such a horrible place." However, at that moment, she didn't know even half of what she was going to experience. The situation at Lee's apartment was empty. What was noticeable was the mess made by the dogs. 2 puppies were lying on the floor. In the absence of water and food, they were dehydrated. Apparently, the animals were trying to find something to eat. Therefore, scraps of papers and clothes were lying everywhere. It became clear that the pets had not been walked for several days, hence the pungent odor that filled the room. Min noticed her friend's conspicuous backpack standing quietly in the corner of the room. Since it contained the essentials, Yoon-hee never went anywhere without it. This indicated that she left the apartment in a hurry or for a short time. The condition of the house did not seem suspicious to the police. At first glance, nothing was missing and there were no signs of forced entry. Therefore, assuming that the wanted girl had left voluntarily and would return soon, the police left. However, such arguments did not satisfy her friends. First, Lee would never in the world would not have left the animals to starve. Secondly, she could not disappear without telling anyone. So, the company contacted Lee's family members. The family confirmed that they hadn't heard from her in days. Dissatisfied with the police officer's conclusion, Min and her friend went to the station. Unfortunately, due to the slowness and poor handling of the investigation, Korean law enforcement agencies have been repeatedly admonished for their actions. So, the young people decided to insist on their own and officially report their friend missing. Evidence at this time, 2 of Lee's other friends stayed at the house. They wanted to wait for her parents and discuss everything. Not wanting to embarrass the missing person's relatives, the guys decided to clean up the apartment. They washed the floors, threw out the trash, and even washed dirty laundry. In general, destroyed all the evidence that had taken place. In addition, it was later learned that upon arrival, Lee's sister threw away the cigarette but found on the veranda. She did so because she didn't want to embarrass her sister in front of her parents. They would be very upset to know that their daughter smokes. But the thing is, Yoon-hee's acquaintances unanimously claimed that they had never seen it. Perhaps in this way, another solid piece of evidence in the case was destroyed. Afterward, the guys were very sorry that wanting to do better only aggravated the situation. The young people explained that at that time the police had not taken up the investigation and had not warned them not to touch anything. When Lee's parents arrived in the evening, They inspected the apartment. Dong, the girl's father, reported that several other things were missing along with his daughter. The first thing he named was a hammer. The man explained that he personally insisted that such a necessary item was in the house. Lee Yoon he had always laughed about it and kept it in plain sight. The other missing item was an antique coffee table. The student was particularly fond of it, often eating at it and using it as a bedside table. It was unclear to everyone where the girl could have gone as well as where two unrelated objects had disappeared to. The unknown painted a frightening picture. The last party. That day, in addition to the police report from Lee's friends, there was another one. The concerned parents of the missing girl decided not to delay. It was already obvious that enough time had passed since the alleged disappearance. She was last seen on June 5th. That was when Yoon-hee and her classmates finished their last practice of the semester. The young people were going to celebrate the significant event. For this purpose, they even invited the teachers. Obviously, not everyone agreed, but some still decided to keep company with a group of 40 students. The protagonist was upset that she had suffered another failure because of an unsuccessful, in her opinion, operation on an animal. Due to this, she had no desire to go to the party. Some even claimed that she locked herself in the restroom and cried. Perhaps before graduation, the diligent student simply lost her nerve. Therefore, she was so critical of herself and saw the world in pessimistic colors. Nevertheless, her friends managed to calm the girl down and persuade her to join the party at the karaoke bar. By 10 o'clock in the evening, Lee's mood had noticeably improved. Everyone gathered in the pub. They ate, drank, remembered university everyday life, danced and sang songs. They were supported by the heroine of the story. CCTV cameras recorded how at around 2:30 at night she left the toilet and left the celebration. It was noticeable that the girl was upset about something. However, the rapid departure was noticed by a 27-year-old guy named Kim and went after her. According to the man, he asked what happened. Since young people were close since their school years, Lee confessed and complained to her friend that someone was watching her in the toilet. However, she did not give any details. Kim was concerned for his friend. He knew that she was already frightened by the recent attack on the street, so he offered to carry her backpack and escort her home. Lee lived in a rented apartment about a 15 to 20-minute walk away. Kim later told investigators that he was unable to walk his buddy to the door. She said goodbye to him in one of the dark alleys. However, the young man still decided to wait until the lights came on in the windows of her house. After making sure that the girl was not threatened, he turned around and went to his house. It should be noted that the guy lived nearby. On June 6th, the country celebrated a national holiday, Memorial Day. Therefore, the absence of news from her did not seem strange to anyone. However, it was after the party that no one saw Yoon-hee. The beginning of the investigation. During the investigation, curious facts were established. On the morning of June 5th, about 4 o'clock the day before the disappearance, one of the classmates came to see Lee. He said that he was fixing a loose leg of the coffee table. He told the investigation that Lee did not want to throw it away, so she asked him to fix it. He stayed in the apartment for about half an hour, he said. After the short repair, the couple went to the university. He was not present during the celebration and never met Lee again. Some claim that the young people were in a romantic relationship, but there is no concrete evidence of this. In parallel, the relatives of the missing woman conducted their own search. One day, Lee's father Dawn, in search of any clues, explored the neighborhood where his daughter lived. Suddenly, between two garbage cans, the man noticed a familiar table. However, the tabletop and the unscrewed metal legs were lying separately. The relatives assumed that it was damaged during the events that took place in the apartment. The find was submitted for examination. It is quite possible that on the ill-fated night Lee was the victim of a brutal attack. Her father was worried that she could have been killed because of the hammer he had given her. It is possible that the perpetrator, having gotten rid of the table, took the tool with him or hid it somewhere. Stalker theory. Amazingly, during the inspection of Lee Yoon-hee's home, the experts were unable to find any fingerprints, DNA, blood, or any other evidence. So thoroughly had Lee's friends cleaned the apartment. Therefore, the police decided to resort to searching for eyewitnesses. Since the walls of the apartment building were quite thin, someone could surely hear something. However, none of the girls' neighbors reported anything unusual. Many of the residents refused to engage in any conversation at all. At the same time, one elderly woman said that a few days before Lee's disappearance, she herself had been harassed. Someone, presumably a man, followed her to her front door and then stopped. The woman decided that opening the door would give a chance for an attack. So she turned sharply and came face to face with the stalker. She noted that the hood made it difficult to see his face. However, her actions frightened the unknown man. He turned around and left. It should be noted that in South Korea, pushing has become widespread. This term means unwanted, intrusive attention to one person by another or a group of people. Very often, law enforcement officers record reports of women who report repeated incidents. It is not uncommon for a stalker to stand at the door and wait before leaving. This further creates feelings of anxiety and fear. Often, sexual offenses are triggered by stalking. Therefore, on October 20th, 2022, a law came into effect that made stalking a crime. The sanction of the article provides for imprisonment for up to 3 years. Previously, it was qualified as a misdemeanor and punishable by a fine of $70. Some believe that a similar situation could have happened to her. However, her case could end tragically. Later, this version found confirmation. In the house across the street, there is an apartment from which there is a clear view of Lee's windows. Whoever lived there could unobstructedly observe her actions. During the investigation, it turned out that the premises had been empty for a long time. However, an inspection revealed several empty cigarette packs and used tissues. Unfortunately, the DNA extracted was not suitable for examination. Nevertheless, it indicated that someone had visited the apartment periodically and stood at the window. The investigation is ongoing. Detectives interviewed all the party participants. Unfortunately, none of them knew what had happened to the girl during the celebration, much less after it. Except, perhaps Kim, who escorted her friend to the alley and waited until she went home. The sincerity of 21 people was tested on a lie detector. All of the subjects passed, but it is still worth noting that this method is not always reliable. However, the polygraph has been used in the country since 1950 and is trustworthy. In addition, task forces with search dogs searched the entire city, as well as the nearest mountains. Volunteers put up tens of thousands of flyers asking for any information. Later, Lee's parents sold all their property and offered 10 million won for information about their daughter's whereabouts. However, all was in vain. A new lead. The missing girl's family and acquaintances wanted to believe that she would return alive. Perhaps because of the stress of her experience, Yoon-hee decided to disappear for a while, forgetting her responsibilities to her parents and the pets she left at home. Maybe she's the one who threw away her favorite but broken table and her unwanted hammer. And there would be an innocent explanation for the dried napkins in the apartment across the street. But that last hope vanished as soon as the cybercrime experts got involved. They scrutinized Lee's computer and recovered the deleted files. Some gruesome details emerged. On June 6th at 2:59 a.m., about the same time the girl was supposed to return home, someone gained access to her desktop. He opened Naver, an internet portal used by 70% of the country's residents. He then typed the following phrases into the search: sexual harassment, contact the police, and 112. The work session ended at 3:02 a.m. The computer itself was manually shut down at 4:21 a.m. Specialists assumed that the missing student came home and sat down at the computer. Based on searches, she was sexually harassed at a party or on her way home. And since she didn't have a phone, she looked for a way to report it online. However, after 3 minutes, her actions were interrupted by someone. Experts also found out that on June 8, between 3:15 in the afternoon and 5:21 in the afternoon, someone turned on the girl's computer again. At the same time, the unknown person deleted the history of messages in the messenger from 10:48 p.m. on June 4th until 3:04 a.m. on June 8. To do this, he used a special program known in narrow circles. After it, it is not possible to restore the chat history. At the same time, it shows that a person who is well versed in computers acted. 2 days later, someone again logged into Lee's account on a popular music site and even checked his email. Using the IP address, police were able to trace the location of the connection. It was a motel in the town of Kunsan, which is 119 miles away. After reviewing the CCTV cameras from that day, detectives found no signs of suspicious behavior or traces of the missing student. However, this fact indicated that she did not disappear of her own accord. Someone was skillfully cleaning up the traces of the crime that had been committed. The first person who comes to mind is Kim, who by a strange coincidence was at Lee's house at the time of the mass deletion of correspondence. If you remember, he stayed with a friend to wait for Yoon-hee's family to arrive and did some cleaning. This gave him the perfect opportunity and enough time to cover up the unwanted actions. Amazingly, when investigators asked the boys if they had turned on Lee's computer, both said they didn't remember. In fact, there were no witnesses, no traces, and no significant leads in the case of Lee Yoon-hee's disappearance. Possible evidence was destroyed during the cleaning and clearing of the chat history. Had the girl's body been found, it is almost certain that the perpetrator would have been caught. For the most part, the victim keeps key evidence of the crime. To this day, however, the student's whereabouts remain unknown, as does her condition. She is most likely dead, and her remains are safely hidden or managed to get rid of them forever. These circumstances lead to another version of what happened, a mad professor. It is known that the faculty where Lee studied collected animal carcasses. This was done so that students were engaged in autopsy and study. At the end of the study, the remains were collected and sent by the agency to a special incinerator. Before this, the biomass was packed in specialized bags. According to the company's rules, the collectors were not allowed to look into them. It should be noted that the site is unpleasant, so they would not do it themselves. Approximately 88 pounds of animal remains are placed in the incinerator daily. However, investigators learned that 2 days after Yoon-hee's disappearance, about 242 pounds were incinerated. In other words, much more than usual. The educational institution worked on different animals: dogs, cats, pigs, and cows. However, according to the records of June 8, there were no large animals. The dilemma arises: what else was burned that day? Could the extra weight have belonged to the missing student's body as well as other evidence? Unfortunately, this question remains unanswered. It was not possible to conduct a genetic examination, as all the ashes were destroyed. Assuming that Lee's body was indeed burned, it means that it was done by someone who killed her and had access to the room. For example, one of the faculty members, Professor Moon, was of great interest, the same man whose children Lee was studying with when her purse was stolen. During the interrogations, several people reported that Moon sometimes showed attention to a beautiful student. He openly flirted with her, unashamed of his status and age. The man was also present during the celebrations at that party and tried to sit next to Lee, but she moved away from him, calling him a creep. It was obvious that she was not accepting his advances. Initially, Moon said he left the event early and was home around 2 a.m. Then, when other detectives noticed that he had left after Lee, he changed his statement. It is quite possible that the professor molested her and then stalked her. Afraid of ruining his reputation, he may have silenced Yoon-hee. It's possible that he followed her that night, then broke into her apartment and killed her. Then he moved the body to the crematorium. He could also have taken the student to the campus by force and burned her alive. Either way, there's a lot of speculation. On the one hand, a stranger obsessed with Lee. He could have stolen her purse to get his hands on the object of his adoration and watched from the apartment across the street before or after the event. It is possible that it was he who attacked, kidnapped, or killed the poor girl. On the other hand, there are a lot of questions about her buddy Kim. Dong stated that there was a suspect they were sure of and pointed him out. There's no video footage of the young men walking home together after the party. Also, no one present saw Lee and Kim leave. It's hard to believe that the girl didn't want to be escorted all the way to the door and said goodbye in an alley at night. Everyone knows that the guy has been in love with her since high school. There is an opinion that he even went to university because of her. At the same time, Lee sincerely trusted him and loved him in her own way, accepted his gifts, spent time with him. However, Lee's feelings were not what he would have wanted. Many joked that Kim became her third puppy. Later, one important detail came to light. Turns out that the young man knew the code from the door of the beloved. In her absence, he repeatedly came to the apartment, looked after the dogs. However, he did not tell about it so as not to defame the girl in the eyes of others. By our standards, South Korea is still a rather strict country. At the same time, it looks suspicious. His motive could have been simple jealousy. He could have snapped when he found out Lee had a boyfriend. He may have secretly followed her and then went up to her apartment. There was an argument during which Kim broke the coffee table and took his girlfriend's life. He then decided to stay behind to clean up the crime scene. At the same time, no charges were brought against him. Moreover, in an interview, the lead detective hinted that he didn't think the guy was involved in the crime. And despite popular belief, the most likely suspect is Professor Moon. The man could have used his official position to lure a student he liked into the lab and do something terrible to her. As of 2017, Kim was married, had children, and his own business. Lee's father still accused him of being involved in his daughter's disappearance. He even organized several demonstrations outside the man's private clinic. To defend his honor, Kim was forced to file a defamation lawsuit. With the court's decision, Dong was banned from approaching Kim's building. To this day, the man claims that many media outlets have defamed his name. 18 years have passed, but the search for Lee still continues. In time, her photos and age image were made public. The missing person's parents have grown old. But before leaving this world, they want to calm down and know for sure whether their daughter is alive or not. Over time, any pain is dulled, even from the loss of a loved one. But there's nothing worse than being left in the dark for years. What do you guys think? Is Lee Yoon-hee alive? And if not, who really killed her? This about a strong woman who broke down in an instant and made a life-changing decision that fundamentally changed the lives of her entire family. This story will remind everyone how important it is to take your mental health and the mental health of your loved ones seriously, and not to be afraid to speak up when things in life don't go the way you want them to. We will visit Atlanta, the capital and most populous city in the state of Georgia. It's a vibrant, busy tourist city that has grown thanks to giants like Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. On November 6, 2021, at around 9 p.m., a man called emergency services to report that exhaustive screams and several gunshots were heard coming from a neighbor's house. Police officers rushed to the scene and entered the home. They found a man and a woman dead on the floor. After examining the scene of the tragedy, the police began their investigation. The murdered spouses were Ronell and Kiana Burns, but who would want to kill a married couple and why? The family lived in a large home that was located in the most ethnically diverse county in Gwinnett County. The house itself did not appear to have been burglarized, as all belongings were still in their places. But the clue to this double crime came to light very quickly. Let's rewind with you the history of the Burns family, like a movie backwards, and see the true cause of the tragedy that occurred. Kiana was born on September 15, 1977, in St. Louis, Missouri. She graduated from Riverview Gardens High School, later at St. Louis Community College in Florissant Valley, where she majored in cosmetology and soon began building her own business career. Kiana opened her own beauty salon, which was popular. The girl was very hardworking, as she always dreamed of a luxurious and rich life. She invested a lot of time in the business and it paid off. Over the next 20 years, with her persistence and hard work, Kiana turned it into one of the largest beauty salons throughout the St. Louis area. However, the personal life of a young, bright woman did not always go smoothly. Strong, wealthy, and ambitious Kiana was very difficult to find a worthy couple. In her 44 years, she had 3 children from previous relationships, whom Kiana loved with all her soul. Her family described her as a great and loving mother. She knew how to support women, was a good friend, and a successful businesswoman. Kiana had it all when she met her future husband, Ronell Burns. Ronell Burns was born on May 14, 1975, in St. Louis, Missouri. Ronell graduated from the High School of Fashion in 1994. He played on the basketball team and played for a state championship. He was very driven, ambitious, especially loved the competitive spirit and always strived for greatness. When he met Kiana, he had 2 children of his own from a previous relationship. So fate brought 2 successful and ambitious people together, and they created a new, strong, and happy family. On September 13, 2012, they officially became husband and wife and celebrated a gorgeous wedding in the presence of numerous relatives and friends. However, soon after the wedding for Kiana began to open new sides of her chosen one. It turned out that at an early age, Ronell dedicated his life to Jesus Christ and wanted to start doing the work of the Lord. He began to serve everyone he could, even those he crossed paths with on the street. Ronell created his own webpage on the internet, where he began coaching and preaching. Ronell voiced that in his early years, God spoke to him and told him to help people. One of the calls stated, sometimes he can call everyone, and only he can allow things to happen in life. Ronell continued his ministry. His video messages were very popular on the internet. In addition to his impressive lines as a church coach, Ronell was a financial counselor and insurance agent. He started a company called Traditional Financial Solutions, where he was determined to help people all over the world become financially independent. Ronell was very successful in his business and in his efforts to help, and his speeches did draw large audiences. Kiana supported her husband. Together they gained popularity online, as Ronell was already quite well known as a leader and coach in Six Figure Ambition, an online program for entrepreneurs. He had over 7,000 followers on Instagram and 2,000 subscribers on YouTube, where he ran a channel with educational videos. Ronell and Kiana Burns brought their families and business minds together. They dreamed together and ended up creating something great that touched thousands of people. Kiana was known as a speaker at business events, where she shared lessons and inspiration on how to succeed. She also had 14,000 followers on Instagram, where she shared thoughts on her family life and inspirational quotes. In one of the popular video messages, the beautiful couple dressed exclusively in branded items appeared before their audience. They talked about entrepreneurship and how it has benefited their lives and the lives of thousands of subscribers. The couple spoke loudly that their mission is to convey to their audience how to become successful entrepreneurs, as well as build their fundamental business. The time to build other people's businesses was over. The Burns family wanted to teach young entrepreneurs not to spend all the money they earned, but to invest it skillfully to generate new money that earned itself. The speech ended with the message that the Burnses believe in everyone who believes in them. And the belief is that you don't have to be great to start, you have to start to become great. They have never hidden their luxurious life, instead flaunting it in front of their audience, attracting new students and subscribers. However, in the Burns family, only Kiana has traveled the path that Ronell has repeatedly described. She has worked hard to build and operate an entire network of salons on her own. At the time of their coaching, Kiana owned several salons and was also a successful insurance agent. It was Kiana's business that brought in most of the family's capital. Ronell, in turn, diligently wanted to occupy a winning position, and therefore there was an image of a wealthy family exclusively in expensive clothes. Photos from the best restaurants were published daily. But rich and successful people go ahead, not wasting time on words, and poor people continued to believe the speeches of the Burns family. By tempting stories of how to earn big money without labor, using only the words of his mentor Ronell, he received a lot of interest from the outside, because every poor person dreams of becoming rich. So Ronell Burns founded a company with six-figure ambitions. It gave them the opportunity to continue to add to their capital and create their own legacy, which he talked about in every interview. The Burnses created a tight-knit family, and for a long time, their entire entourage thought so. Until Ronell suggested that Kiana move from her beloved and native St. Louis to Atlanta. By that time, they already had 3 children together, Rhea, Makey, and Ray Haley, parents to their children, and well known in their careers. Ronell and Kiana Burns were inspirational figures that people looked up to. The move to Atlanta was a forced move. They had plans to expand their business. Having owned his wife's business, Ronell dreamed of expanding it. 3 beauty salons in St. Louis was no longer enough for him. The ambitious Ronell wanted to establish a chain of salons in Atlanta, as well to expand his clientele. Kiana was reluctant to move out of St. Louis, but again gave in to her husband and continued to play along with him in front of the public. Kiana Burns painted a rosy picture of her life. On social media, she posted a picture of her receiving a premium Maserati Levant car as a gift from her husband. She also shared photos of her trunk full of Louis Vuitton bags. Each such post was captioned with words of admiration and gratitude to her husband. But, like any blogger, Kiana often dedicated her Instagram feed to her beloved children and family. After a while, the woman couldn't stand it and admitted to her audience that everything in their family is not as smooth as it looks. Turned out that the couple was on the verge of divorce. After moving to Atlanta, Kiana was left alone in a big, unfamiliar city where she had to start all over again. In a video message, she shared with her subscribers that it was hard for her to decide to move and adjust to a new home and new people. "You have to be ready for life changes," she said during her Facebook live stream. "Things in your life can change for the better or for the worse overnight. Literally, if you don't think you're a strong enough person, some things can take you out of yourself." She told her followers that she needed their support as she was going through a difficult time. Kiana admitted that her favorite subscribers are helping her get through the dark days, which have become quite a lot lately. From the outside, no one knew that they were so close to divorcing each other. This confession disturbed the subscribers, and Ranel had to speak out live on air too. He revealed that they decided 7 months ago that they were going to get a divorce. His words sounded like a business plan again. "I'm tired of her. We're going to continue to run our business together going forward, but we're also announcing that we're going to divorce. We've dealt with each other. We've both come to this conclusion, but let's not put pressure and grieve. Everything around us will remain the same." We took out a piece of paper on which we drew a line down the middle. That's how we decided how we're going to divide the business. But for obvious reasons, bloggers share only positive stories with their followers. To tell about failures is to lose faith and, in the case of the Burns family, their status which has been built up over the years. However, being public figures, it soon did become clear that the family's wealthy life was just a picture for social media. Ranel, in his hunt for fame and popularity, very quickly squandered all the money Kiana received from beauty salons. But he did not stop there, and the debt of the Burns family to various banks in a few years reached more than $500,000. Obviously, the move to an unfamiliar city and financial difficulties reached their peak. On the eve of the tragedy, Kiana Burns went live and interacted with her subscribers. She went live where she asked her fans to pray for her strength as she struggles without the support and help of family and friends, especially as she cares for her children. In the post, Kiana talked about life changes and shared how she and her husband moved to Atlanta to expand their business just 5 or 6 months ago. She wrote, "I tell you that if you don't pray and keep the faith, things can change and take you away." She also spoke of the existence of a supportive love circle that will help you and talk to you about things that you just can't seem to get past. Because if we leave things to chance, we start to think to ourselves and make bad decisions. At the end of her speech, she added that any change in life is not always smooth sailing. Learning about new environments and new people, especially without the support of immediate family and friends, is sometimes very difficult. The woman also admitted that she is working with her mental health and worries that she is not strong enough to take on the challenges of fate. But was the move the main reason for the imbalance in the family? In that speech, Kiana was silent that the real cause of the rift was Ronell's numerous cheating and promiscuous life, which always remained behind the scenes of their happy life on Instagram. However, on the same night, she posted a video again, where she was dancing merrily at home with one of her daughters. A few hours later, the unthinkable happened. Kiana and Ronell had a long argument. She then grabbed a gun and shot him, then herself. Authorities were first called to the Burns home. By the time police arrived, neighbors had gathered outside and said they heard gunshots coming from inside. Preliminary stages of the investigation determined that Ronell Burns had shot himself. But soon discovering Kiana's bloody body in the next room with a gun in her hands, it became apparent that the decision had come from a woman. The motive was clear, but some people claimed that Kiana was forced to kill her husband after she discovered he was cheating on her. Another version said that the couple was in terrible debt and that Ronell turned out to be a common con man who ended up cheating on her. People who believed this family dug hard into their lives in search of the truth. They discovered some very compromising information from Ronell's ex-wife. She claimed that during her divorce proceedings, she had learned that Ronell was a habitual chronic cheater. During that time period, he was extremely irresponsible with his wife's money and also failed to hold down any jobs, which ultimately led to ruin and a ruined credit history for his now ex-wife. Then he met Kiana. She was actually of great interest to Ronell as she was a successful career woman. She in turn was attracted to Ronell's confidence and swagger. Kiana's fortune and Ronell's experience seemed to be a winning combination, but these expectations were not met and all their business endeavors eventually collapsed. Only Kiana's beauty salon remained afloat, and from that moment on, despite the lack of income from Ronell, he actively continued to convince everyone what a successful businessman he was. The family successfully hid the real state of affairs and their severe lack of money on social media, continuously showing off expensive purchases. They also carefully hid the problems in their relationship behind happy photos together. On his account, Ronell continued to publish posts about his business endeavors, where he claimed that everything he takes on becomes successful and profitable. The Burns couple showed themselves to be devout Christians, and in each post, they added quotes from the Bible and other holy scriptures that fit the meaning of the speech. The couple also posted photos of their luxurious residence, showing the public their wealth and family in great detail. However, all these photos, which they showed in their home or at a party in front of cars or on vacation, in reality were only a cover and show. Ronell worked for an American marketing insurance company that extorted money from middle and lower income families. In fact, the man tried to involve even his family members and friends in this fraudulent scheme in order to raise his status. But Ronell did not get enough money from this activity in the firm and could not support himself. They kept convincing everyone around them that the new business was successful, and they themselves were successful entrepreneurs. Their arrogance was so strong that they even made a TV series about themselves, calling it Meet the Burns. Everything they supposedly earned was immediately spent on a lavish lifestyle and a desire to feel like someone they really weren't. Such profligacy eventually led them to bankruptcy. So on December 19, 2019, Kiana and Ronell Burns filed an official bankruptcy petition. The couple had to liquidate some of their assets to pay off their creditors. While this was going on in their lives, Ronell and Kiana still continued to pretend like nothing was going on. They continued to portray themselves as a happy family and successful businessmen. But in St. Louis, it was getting harder and harder to do that. So Ronell decided that their family should move to a bigger city so that he could continue to scam more people with impunity. This became another stupid and failed decision on his part. They still had a thriving business that was the family's only source of income. Unfortunately, Kiana once again went along with her husband and agreed to the move. Kiana couldn't get used to Atlanta. She already knew that her husband had cheated on her repeatedly. The woman was tired of being patient and silent. Together, they made the decision to divorce. But in papers filed on October 10, 2021, Ronell listed his wife's infidelity as the reason for the divorce. Kiana was destroyed, but she understood the reasons as family and friends had no idea of the couple's difficulties. Ronell hid the truth from the public in hopes of preserving his image. On October 20th, 10 days after Ronell filed for divorce, Kiana went on live TV that day to talk about something much more serious. The bright smile she often displayed was now replaced by an expression of concern and sadness. After divorcing his first wife, conman Ronell Burns had remarried the successful and wealthy Kiana, and using his new image as a devout guru, he seemed a changed and reliable man. But in reality, he hadn't changed and continued to take advantage of his new wife's trust and money by playing the successful businessman. What seemed like a perfect union was over. On November 9, 2021, 44-year-old Kiana Burns shot and killed her husband, 46-year-old Ronell Burns, before pointing the gun at herself and committing suicide. The Sandy Springs Police Department said no one was home at the time of murder, but the couple left behind 8 children who will now grow up without parents. Police said there was no history of domestic violence at the family's Atlanta home. Kiana Burns committed this a few weeks after asking her Facebook friends to pray for her. The reasons for this decision by Kiana Burns are unknown. One can only speculate what prompted the strong-spirited woman to make such a drastic decision. It is obvious that at that time she saw only such a way out while in a difficult condition. She withdrew into herself through unsolvable inner problems. She was tired of appearing to be happy instead of being happy. All their life together, they had portrayed that they were happy. However, everything in this family was a farce and a game. Absolutely everything. Kiana was tired of lying. It's hard to judge what a person does under a cloud of depression and other debilitating mental disorders. But it's also hard to understand why so many children are left alone in this world, essentially to fend for themselves. News of the influential couple's death has traveled throughout their vast network of friends and colleagues. The death of Ronell Burns and his wife Kiana has been widely publicized on social media. Numerous followers and friends shared words of regret describing the couple. People close to the couple paid tribute. One post written by a family friend shows that even people very close to the couple didn't know the real truth about the family until the end. Ronell Burns was someone who felt the need to flaunt his success and luxury, and these are usually the most insecure people. He got so caught up in his own self-belief that he mistook his sense of self-worth for a sense of self-importance. Imitating a stormy activity, he was able to ruin the life of more than one diligent and successful woman. Such people have no pride and no sense of dignity. He's just an ordinary con man who dragged his wives to the bottom. But where does a man like him get his pride? He deceived women, making them believe in beautiful fairy tales of happiness and success that awaits them only with him. Because it is known that women love with their ears and dream of eternal love. And subscribers, will you say? Who tells subscribers the whole truth? They are strangers for whom they always create a beautiful picture. But do not forget that a beautiful picture, which is depicted on the front side of the paper, always has a backside, and what it will be decide only you. On September 27, 2020, a man called emergency services around 6 p.m. Lamantine County dispatchers recorded the call in which the man said a neighbor woman ran up to his house screaming for help. She claimed she was fleeing from her husband who had just attacked her in the house. The woman was crying continuously, but she did not look like a victim at all because she was holding a gun. Police officers who arrived on the scene found the husband's attacker alive in the bedroom with 2 gunshot wounds. One was to the leg and the other to the chest. The bullet also grazed the right arm. 2 more bullets were found in the wall, as well as 4 shell casings from a .45 caliber pistol were near the injured man. The victim was taken to a local hospital where he died of his injuries an hour later. Police officers thoroughly examined the scene of the tragedy and interviewed the woman, but she did not make contact with law enforcement. She was not arrested that night, and detectives began investigating her claim of self-defense. The injured woman turned out to be Ashley Benefield, and the man who was killed was her husband Douglas Benefield. But let's find out how events really unfolded that day. And could Ashley really have saved herself only by shooting her husband? Our story begins in sunny Florida in August 2016. Ashley Byers and Douglas Benefield met at a Republican fundraising event in Palm Beach. The man was so charmed by the young girl that he asked for her phone number after dinner. That same evening, their romantic correspondence began. At the time of their acquaintance, 24-year-old Ashley Byers worked in the campaign headquarters of Donald Trump in Sarasota. Her job was to encourage evangelicals to vote and hold rallies. In addition to her political activities, Ashley was also an aspiring model and dancer with the Maryland Youth Ballet, where she occasionally performed. However, Ashley dreamed of becoming a famous ballerina and starting her own ballet company. Douglas Benefield was 30 years older than Ashley. He was originally from Charleston, a former Navy pilot and a successful consultant who worked with technology companies and defense contractors. He was also involved in real estate and the restaurant business. Douglas was widowed about a year ago and single-handedly raised his 15-year-old daughter, Eva. The grown man and the young girl were brought together by conservative values and a love of guns. Despite the large age difference between them, immediately sparked sparks, and after only 13 days, they got married. A modest celebration was held in Douglas' hometown of Charleston. Among the invited guests was only Douglas' friend, Trip Cormany, who was an ordained Episcopal pastor at the time. Trip wasn't thrilled and resented what he considered too short a time for them to have known each other, but agreed to perform the ceremony, for Douglas was deeply religious, so he wanted to marry Ashley before he became intimate with her. For the rest of the couple's family and friends, the wedding was a surprise. Douglas did not even invite his daughter to the wedding. Eva Benefield was 15 years old at the time and was still taking the trauma of losing her mom hard. Just 9 months ago, Eva came home from school and discovered the dead body of her mother, Renee. She had died of an undiagnosed heart condition. Eva was stunned by her father's sudden marriage to a girl who was only 9 years older than her. After Ashley moved into Douglas' home in Charleston, the relationship between her and Eva did not work out, which became an occasion for regular quarrels and scandals within the family. The close father-daughter relationship suffered greatly because of Douglas' new wife. Ashley did not want to become a stepmother or just a friend for her husband's daughter. Eva, on the other hand, felt that she was simply losing her father. Ashley Benefield dreamed of creating a ballet company, which would include dancers of all nationalities with any physique, and Douglas promised to make his wife's dream a reality. He idolized his young wife. Douglas constantly arranged romantic dates and surprises for Ashley, giving her flowers and telling her she was the most beautiful. Tall, slender, and graceful Ashley, like a swan, really charmed everyone who knew her. Her blue eyes radiated kindness. Her long brown hair, like plumage for a bird, added beauty and glamour. Douglas saw only spiritual purity in his Ashley and was willing to do anything for her. So soon, her dream came true. Combining Ashley's passion for ballet with Douglas' business savvy, they founded the American National Ballet in Charleston and advertised to screen ballet dancers from all over the country. The goal was to run a non-profit ballet company and for-profit school. In the summer of 2017, Ashley and Douglas began holding the first editions. But in addition to starting a ballet company, Ashley also dreamed of becoming a mother and was planning a pregnancy. This is exactly what happened in the midst of creating the ballet company. In the late summer of 2017, about 40 dancers from around the world began arriving in Charleston to work with Ashley. But she never showed up for another audition. All the work fell on Douglas' shoulders. Douglas hired ballet master Michael Wise to train the dancers. But it was Ashley who many dancers were waiting for. But she wasn't planning on doing ballet anytime soon, citing a serious condition due to her pregnancy. Despite the growing tension between Ashley and Eva, Douglas continued to help his wife follow her dream, to start a ballet company in Charleston with a unique mission. The man, who was quite distant from ballet, with the help of hired choreographers and managers, tried to run the business on his own. But the company soon ran into legal trouble after being sued by dancers and choreographers who accused the couple of breach of contract, claiming they were fired just weeks after being hired. After leaving, Ashley Douglas brought in new managers in hopes of getting the ballet up and running. But they made drastic changes, and Ashley's original vision of dancers of all ethnicities failed. Douglas was so preoccupied with the ballet that he didn't notice how tensions between Ashley and Eva continued to mount. One day, after Douglas and Ashley argued over Eva, he lost his temper and fired a gun into the ceiling of their home. Those who knew him said it was uncharacteristic of the calm and non-confrontational Douglas. In late August, citing a difficult pregnancy, Ashley returned to Florida to her mother, while Douglas was still trying to establish the work of the ballet in Charleston. On October 23, 2017, a group of dancers were called into a meeting, told to sign non-disclosure agreements, and fired. Online, Ashley spoke out against the rest of the company, including Douglas. "The new management has destroyed everything we've worked so hard for, and I cannot stand behind them or their actions," she reported. A&B was created to be different from any other dance company and should have set a new standard in how it treats its dancers. Everyone involved should be ashamed of how it was handled. It seemed as if a great idea had dissipated like smoke. A few months later, the American National Ballet was finished for good. At the conclusion of the ballet case, Douglas had lost over $100,000. His ballet nightmare was over. Douglas threw a farewell party for A&B, as he had worked closely with many dancers for a long time. However, when he returned home, it was not his pregnant wife who was waiting for him, but a farewell note. In her 4-page letter, Ashley listed all of Douglas' shortcomings and called his attitude towards her possessive and controlling. She wrote that the incident where he fired a gun into the ceiling had made her fear for her life and the safety of her unborn child. So she had to leave him. His heart was broken. But as it later turned out, Ashley's note was only the beginning. The months that followed were even more difficult for Douglas, as he was faced with a blow from the man who was dear to him. In late November 2017, Douglas, still hoping for reconciliation, sent Ashley a birthday present. He knew how much his wife loved tea. He bought a beautiful teapot, cups and saucers, and a specialty tea designed for pregnant women. Ashley accepted the gift, but she wasn't going to put up with it. Instead, she filed a series of charges against Douglas. Among them was poisoning her with her tea. Her claims were investigated, but nothing was found to substantiate such grave accusations. But Ashley didn't stop there and sent her hair to an independent lab for analysis to determine if she had been poisoned. The report stated that her hair contained higher than normal levels of aluminium, zinc, and other metals. 3 weeks before giving birth, without Douglas' knowledge, Ashley went into the hospital. She was at Tampa General Hospital. The woman was very frightened and claimed that the baby had been intrauterine exposure to heavy metals because her husband had poisoned her. Ashley went on to accuse Douglas of physical abuse without evidence. She also claimed that he held her captive in his Charleston home. Even though Douglas was hundreds of miles away, she still claimed he was stalking her everywhere starting in Florida. With no way to know if what Ashley told hospital staff was true, management took precautions for her safety and gave her a new name, Christina. 3 days later, doctors performed a C-section. The baby girl was healthy, but Ashley continued to worry that her baby had been poisoned. Douglas, however, wasn't ready to give up. He sent Ashley text after text begging her to change her mind. After all, he believed he still had a family that he thought would be perfect, happy, and faithful, but it had fallen apart in the most questionable way. Ashley was in no mood to forgive Douglas, much less go back. She decided to go to the authorities and add a new batch of accusations in her husband's direction. She reported Douglas' mistreatment of his oldest daughter, Eva, and brought in Florida Child Protective Services to check it out. Ashley told police that Douglas had anger issues and told all about the day he fired a gun in the house. Investigators interviewed Eva, so also Douglas was interviewed and that gun incident was investigated, but in the end, Douglas was exonerated. He was examined by a psychologist who did a full psychological evaluation which showed that Douglas was perfectly fine and not dangerous. Ashley couldn't believe it and once again wrote a long letter to Douglas. The lines at the end made it clear for him not to hit on her or try to stalk her or it would end up with the police again. She didn't look like a person ready to resume a relationship. Another scathing note to Ashley Douglas left no doubt about her feelings. In the summer of 2018, the poisoning allegations came to a head when Ashley and Douglas met in a Bradenton courtroom. Douglas wanted to see his newborn daughter, while Ashley asked for a restraining order. But the judge was not convinced by 2 days of testimony and lab test results presented by Ashley. Judge Diane Moreland declared that there was not the slightest credible evidence that Miss Benefield had ever been poisoned or suffered from any illness caused by any poison. This ruling opened the door for Douglas to finally see his daughter. A few days later, he and Ashley met outside the sheriff's office so the father could see the child. To the surprise of those around them, Ashley was suddenly very cooperative. She then immediately went straight to Douglas, handed the baby over very cordially. She even offered to spend time with the three of them. For most of the next year, Douglas, Ashley, and their daughter seemed happy. Douglas even moved into a neighboring apartment in Florida, so he wouldn't disturb Ashley's peace and still be close to them. But in August 2019, when he met Ashley to pick up his daughter, was stunned to see an engagement ring on his wife's finger. He hired a private investigator to find out what was going on. The private investigator informed Douglas that Ashley was dating another man, and in November 2019, the man filed for divorce. Shortly afterward, Ashley began filing complaints against Douglas Benefield again. Ashley accused him of indecent behavior towards his young daughter. She accused him of a number of terrible things. Douglas adamantly denied harming his daughter, and authorities accepted the lack of evidence. Then in March 2020, Douglas wrote an email to the sheriff's office accusing Ashley of having a split personality. But a few months later, Douglas did what seemed unthinkable. In a dizzying move, he announced that he and Ashley were going to try to be a family again and were moving to Maryland. Friends held their breath but hoped for the sake of their young daughter that her parents' miraculous reunion was about to happen. On September 27, 2020, Douglas Benefield was preparing to start a new life. He was moving with Ashley, their young daughter, and Ashley's mother Alicia from Florida to Maryland. So let's pretend it's Sunday night. The time is about 5:30 in the evening. Ashley meets Douglas to start packing for the move. Douglas and Ashley are at Alicia's house, happily packing. Alicia decides to take a walk with the baby to a nearby park. Ashley is left alone with Douglas. They talk, but suddenly Ashley announces that they are moving without him. Douglas was angry. He yelled that they would move in together as a family and start a new life. The man began moving filled boxes in a rage. Ashley Benefield tried to leave the house, but Douglas allegedly grabbed her left arm, yanked her back, and asked where she was going. He threatened her with his index finger like a naughty child with the words, "You can't leave me." But for Ashley, it was enough to make her fear for her life once again. Ashley Benefield ran into her bedroom and grabbed the gun she legally owned. She pointed the gun at Douglas and ordered him to leave her alone and leave the house. Douglas did not stop and continued walking toward Ashley, hoping to calm her down. As he continued toward her, she began shooting. Ashley saw Douglas fall and his legs lifted into the air as his feet slipped out from under him and he suddenly collapsed. The woman ran to the neighbor's house screaming for help. Two neighbors on a dog walk saw her running outside with a gun, crying and screaming. However, only Ashley knows exactly what really happened that night but she has not made any statements. 5 weeks after the shooting, Ashley was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. She pleaded not guilty. She was released on bail after spending about 2 weeks in jail. Ashley began cooperating with authorities on November 4, 2020. At that time, she was formally arrested and charged with second-degree murder. She is currently being held without bail pending a future court date. In February 2023, Ashley Benefield's defense filed a motion to dismiss the case, arguing that she shot her husband in self-defense. The 105-page motion outlines her side of the story, explaining what led to the fatal shooting. Ashley Benefield's attorney, Neil Taylor, said the motion is in part their attempt to shed light on her side of the story. In the motion to dismiss, Ashley Benefield's attorneys added evidence, documents, and photos to support their case. These include photos of Douglas Benefield that show his impeccable physique and strength, as well as a cut on the side of Ashley Benefield's body that she allegedly received from a moving box that Douglas was moving in her direction. Another photo of Ashley Benefield with a black eye. The defense claims the photos of her injuries were taken the day of the shooting. Defense attorneys have tried every way they can to implicate Douglas of cruelty and uncontrolled aggression, adding to the case with a long-standing admission that he punched their dog and punched a hole in the wall. In July 2018, he allegedly admitted to pulling a gun out of his sleeve and shooting at the ceiling, even throwing the gun at a wall, in an attempt to silence Ashley Benefield during an argument. During the initial hearing, Assistant State's Attorneys, Suzanne O'Donnell and Rebecca Friel, as well as Ashley Benefield's attorney, Neil Taylor, argued whether Ashley Benefield's actions the night she fired a gun at Doug Benefield were self-defense. A Clementine County judge denied a motion to dismiss the case against Ashley, who was accused of killing her ex-husband nearly 2 months after she appeared in court for a hearing. Circuit Court Judge Stephen White said the totality of the evidence presented during the hearing showed that the state proved that the killing of Douglas Benefield was not a single act of necessary self-defense, but instead was the culmination of a long, concerted effort by Ashley Benefield. The ruling rejected the defense's version of what happened and agreed with the state that probable cause existed to continue the case. The competent and substantial evidence presented by the state clearly and convincingly demonstrates that the defendant is not entitled to judicial immunity from prosecution because she was not justified in using deadly force against the victim on September 27, 2020, Judge White wrote in the ruling. So Ashley Benefield was denied dismissal of the case and immunity. The evidence presented in court was not enough to convince the prosecutor and the court to shoot. Court documents state that on that fateful day of September 27, 2020, Douglas Benefield went to visit his child at the Lakewood Ranch home where the suspect was staying with her mother. An argument ensued, resulting in him being shot. He later died from his injuries at a local hospital. Ashley Benefield claimed Douglas grabbed her and began hitting her when she tried to leave. Authorities' affidavit states that based on the entry wounds on Douglas' body, he was not facing Ashley when she began shooting. He also did not take any defensive position. Douglas was not found to have any weapon on or near him, but as detectives investigated, Ashley's claim of self-defense became problematic. Apparently, the man didn't even expect his beloved wife to shoot him. Ashley Benefield insists she is innocent and awaiting trial. She has not yet pleaded guilty. To date, there are many unanswered questions surrounding Douglas and Ashley's marriage. All we know is that by her own admission, she did shoot her husband and caused his death. Is it possible that Ashley was really afraid of Douglas and was prepared to defend herself at any time of the day or night? Of course, she could have been afraid of him. Fear is one of the strongest human emotions that is easily controlled and manipulated. But it's impossible to be afraid of something that isn't there. Ashley had lived in an invented fear for years and constantly expected to be attacked. She killed her husband for threatening her with a finger in her face. Sounds very much like paranoia when, along with the poisoning complaints, it was worth having not only Douglas but Ashley checked out by a psychologist. It's hard to know if Ashley was a victim or a skillful manipulator. In the end, Ashley was charged with second-degree murder and is currently still awaiting trial. Florida Stand Your Ground law allows a person to use or threaten to use deadly force against another person if they reasonably believe they need to defend themselves from an immediate threat and they have no need to retreat. This means that if a person in Florida believes that he or she is in serious danger of being injured or killed and is not engaged in criminal activity, he or she has the right to defend himself or herself. Unlike traditional self-defense laws, a person must not try to get away from an attacker first. Now that the defense has invoked Stand Your Ground, the burden is on the prosecution to prove the shooting was not justified. Taylor said he expects District Court Judge Stephen White to give the prosecution enough time to read and understand the motion before setting a date for another hearing. To Douglas Benefield, Ashley was that innocent, pure white swan, the epitome of gentleness and purity, but beneath those white feathers was an evil woman. She's the black swan. Financial hardships can befall anyone. Some resolve their difficulties swiftly, while others may struggle for years. However, how one chooses to overcome these challenges is crucial. While some work diligently, earning money through honest labor, others resort to crime for quick gains. There's also a third group willing to partake in the creation of controversial, yet in-demand adult content, naturally for a substantial reward. Engaging in this line of work isn't illegal, but actors, often actresses in this genre, face severe societal judgment and criticism. Nonetheless, the allure of rapid wealth and the pursuit of dubious fame can override moral principles. Moreover, many now operate remotely, setting up studios at home and conducting live broadcasts. Yet, one must not overlook the potential severe emotional harm to the actresses, leading to real tragedies. The case of Carol Maltese, a young mother and actress in adult films, is a stark example of what striving for fame and money in this industry can lead to. She didn't view her work as immoral. She was merely striving for financial independence, planning to retire once she had enough to support herself and her young son. However, she was never able to leave the industry, and tragically, her body, once admired by thousands of fans, was eventually found dismembered on a rocky cliff beside a road. Childhood and early years of Carol Maltese. Carol Nicole Maltese was born on September 19, 1995, in a small Italian province, the only child of her parents, Fabio and Josephine. She had Italian maternal roots and Dutch paternal heritage. When she was just 4 years old, her parents decided to divorce, and she stayed with her mother. Subsequently, her father moved back to his homeland, the Netherlands, remarried, and had more children. Josephine chose to remain in Italy, raising her daughter alone as her former husband offered little support. They lived in a small community called Sesto Calenda, in the province of Varese. The mother worked multiple jobs simultaneously to provide her daughter with everything necessary, a good education, and the opportunity for a better life. Carol grew up to be a beautiful, kind, and sociable girl, with many friends and an easy rapport with others. As a schoolgirl, she actively participated in sports, particularly horseback riding, and regularly attended a dance studio. Maltese was fluent in 3 languages, loved traveling across Europe, read extensively, and could engage in conversation on almost any subject. As a teenager, she became a true beauty, with a slim, feminine figure, already having many admirers and suitors, and she loved being the center of attention. After finishing school, she entered a technical university to study industrial design, arts, and fashion, where she soon became one of the top students in her class. During her freshman year, Carol developed a romantic relationship with a young man a year her senior, who was studying at the Faculty of Architecture and Design. In the fall of 2020, when Carol was 20 years old, she discovered she was pregnant. This news was a complete surprise to both her and the child's father. They were both students and utterly unprepared for such a development. Nevertheless, Carol firmly decided to keep the baby. In 2016, the young couple had a son together, and their lives changed drastically. Both had to leave school because they lacked the funds to support themselves and their newborn. The new parents decided to move to Verona, where there were more opportunities to earn a living and provide for their family. Carol got a job as a sales consultant in a large cosmetics and perfume retail chain shortly after her son turned 1, while her boyfriend worked on various projects from home, also taking care of their son. In the middle of 2019, Carol unexpectedly fell for another man named Angelo, with whom she began a passionate affair. The couple secretly met for about 6 months, renting hotel rooms, messaging each other at night, and striving to spend every free moment together. However, just before the new year, the father of Carol's child found out about her relationship and decided to part ways with his unfaithful partner. Maltese felt this was for the best since she was planning to leave for her new boyfriend anyway. But then a problem arose. Angelo lived in his parents' house, and Carol couldn't move there with her child from a previous relationship. Therefore, they decided to rent a place together. But at that time, the coronavirus pandemic swept the world, leaving the young couple jobless and unable to afford their own apartment. Carol eventually moved into the home of her new boyfriend's parents and decided to temporarily leave her 4-year-old son with his biological father until the situation stabilized and she could bring him to live with her. Meanwhile, the situation worsened. A widespread self-isolation regime was declared. Everyone was confined to their homes, and Carol faced significant financial difficulties. During this challenging period, Angelo and his parents supported Carol as best they could. She effectively lived at their expense in their home, unable to contribute financially to her young son. Moreover, Carol's mother was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, which was progressing, and the woman needed costly therapy. Unexpected source of income amidst the lockdown, Maltese frantically considered how to earn money from home to support her son and ill mother. She decided to try earning through social networks and her own YouTube channel, sharing about life in isolation and the challenges she faced. However, this content didn't attract much interest, but her striking appearance as a novice blogger drew attention, earning her compliments and even some inappropriate proposals in the comments. A subscriber suggested she create an account on the platform OnlyFans, noting that her striking looks would be highly appreciated there, and she could become a star and earn quickly. Carol took this advice and registered on the service under the pseudonym Charlotte Angel. She began creating revealing content, posting her intimate photos and short videos. Quickly, she amassed a significant following willing to pay for such content. Carol soon began earning well, but kept from her boyfriend and close relatives how she was making money and what she was being paid for. Over time, her content became more explicit and sophisticated, as she strove to please her fans, and she herself enjoyed this line of work. Carol hid the details of her job as long as she could, but about 6 months later, someone she knew stumbled upon her account. Rumors spread, and soon everyone knew how she was making a living. She wasn't too upset and even tried to justify it by claiming that her work was also a form of art that brought in a decent income and fully satisfied her. However, the conservative Italians were not ready to accept this, so friends and close ones gradually turned away from Carol, believing she was engaged in something immoral, and associating with her might tarnish their reputations. Carol herself regarded this attitude towards her work as prejudice, and was confident that she would achieve success, becoming wealthy and famous. Adult film stars soon, the beauty became so popular that adult film studios took serious interest. Several directors approached the sultry Italian with offers to star in their films, and she readily agreed. She participated in group shoots and public performances. Word of her activities quickly reached Angelo, who naively thought his girlfriend was working remotely as a designer, but sometimes went to the office. He was shocked and at a loss for what to do next, as he hadn't planned on breaking up with her. However, when his parents learned about the situation, they insisted he break up with this fallen woman immediately, lest she disgrace their entire family. By then, Carol had enough money to rent her own place. Her OnlyFans account was extremely popular. She regularly received offers from directors, and her fees kept increasing. In interviews, she claimed she didn't plan to do this all her life and intended to eventually finish her education and try her hand as a designer or modeler. But for now, she truly enjoyed what she was doing and was well compensated for it. Nonetheless, Carol often spoke about the constant moral pressure from those around her, their judgments and attempts to shame her, causing certain psychological traumas. She called her work art and advocated for every woman's right to choose her profession without fear of judgment. Attempt to move on and a new dominant lover. At 25, Maltese moved to a small town called Rescaldina in the Milan province, deciding to start over. She planned to leave her career in the adult industry behind and got a job as a sales consultant at a perfume boutique. It seemed she had completely changed her life, but this was only temporary. A few months later, she met a 42-year-old local banker named Davide Fontana, who was passionate about photography, specializing in nude styles. They met online where he was seeking a model for his explicit projects. Carol responded to his offer, and during their first meeting, the pair felt an irresistible mutual attraction. Fontana had been officially married for many years, but this did not stop him from starting a relationship with the young beauty. They began dating, organizing explicit photo sessions that invariably ended in intimacy. Soon, he learned about Carol's past activities and convinced her to return to filmmaking, noting her real talent. Davide had mixed feelings for her. He loved her, wanted to possess her, but also liked seeing his young lover in adult films. In March 2021, the banker divorced his wife and started living with Carol, realizing their most explicit and sinful fantasies. He helped her create content that was incredibly popular on OnlyFans, but he took a cut of the profits from their joint work. Carol soon became so successful and popular that foreign directors and studios began offering her lucrative contracts for shoots. Fontana was quite jealous in life, reacting sharply when others paid attention to his girlfriend on the street or tried flirting with her, but there were no restrictions or limits when it came to filming. He treated it as a regular job, which the actress was completely comfortable with. A few months later, Angelo called her, confessing he missed her greatly. He proposed they get back together, noting he was ready to accept her line of work and wouldn't interfere or restrict her. Carol was touched but admitted she already had another man. Nevertheless, they continued to communicate, but when Davide learned about this, he became enraged, threatened Angelo, and even set his car on fire. Angelo immediately reported to the police about the threats to his life and property damage. The authorities issued a restraining order preventing Fontana from approaching Angelo, but no evidence of the banker's involvement in the arson was found, so he did not compensate for the damage. Workplace romance. The in-demand actress often flew overseas for shoots, and her subscribers numbered over 30,000. Carol was saving up to buy her own home to take her son with her and planned to leave the adult film industry, find another job, and focus on raising her son. Meanwhile, she began making custom videos, which proved to be a lucrative business. Fans sent her their own scripts of what they wanted to see, and she brought their fantasies to life for a handsome fee. Fontana continued to help her with filming and editing. They still lived together and shared the profits. In September 2021, Maltese met an actor named Salvatore Goldo on a film set, who was her partner in several explicit films. However, real feelings ignited between them, and they started a romantic relationship. They dated secretly, fearing what Davide might do to her new lover. She waited for the right moment to tell the banker everything and break up with him for good. A few months later, Goldo gave her an engagement ring, asking her to become his lawful wife, and she joyfully accepted. By the end of the year, Carol had saved enough money to buy her own home. She planned to take her son, marry Salvatore, and finally decided to talk to Fontana. The man took the news surprisingly calmly. It seemed he understood everything, and was ready to let her go to her new lover. But they still had several unfinished projects for which they had already been paid. They agreed to complete the work and then peacefully part ways forever. The mysterious disappearance of Carol at the beginning of 2022, Maltese unexpectedly vanished. She stopped appearing in films, ceased online streams, didn't communicate with colleagues, and accepted no new offers from directors. Many knew she had planned to leave the industry, so they assumed she had done just that. However, even her friends and fiancé, who were very concerned, couldn't reach her. Carol didn't answer calls but responded to messages and messengers, claiming she was fine, had decided to radically change her life, and needed time for herself. To her fiancé Salvatore, she wrote that she had contracted COVID-19, was self-isolating, and they couldn't see each other for a while. Apparently, this explanation satisfied him, as he did not raise the alarm either a month or 3 months later. On social media, new posts occasionally appeared on her account, but she hardly interacted with anyone, limiting herself to terse and brief responses. According to the latest photos on Carol's page, she had gone on a seaside vacation without telling anyone, parts of an unidentified body in bags. On March 20, 2022, a passerby was walking along the outskirts of the Italian community of Borno, on a road along a rocky cliff. He was suddenly drawn to large black trash bags, lying on the slope, near a body of water. The area was scenic and deserted, so the man was annoyed that someone had decided to dump trash there. He went down to the nearest bag and tried to lift it, but it was quite heavy. The real horror struck him when he saw human fingers poking through the torn polyethylene. The man immediately reported his gruesome discovery to the police, and the responding officers found 4 bags containing a human body, divided into 18 parts. The remains were so disfigured that identification seemed impossible. Forensic experts determined it was a young woman who had died at least 2 months earlier, but they could not establish the cause of death. The body had been in a freezer before someone dumped it off the cliff. Presumably, the criminal drove here, simply throwing the bags down, hoping that in such a secluded place, they would remain undiscovered for a long time. The bags tore on impact, causing some of the contents to spill out. Clearly, the criminal had done everything possible to keep the remains unidentified for as long as possible by removing all distinctive features. Pieces of skin were cut off in areas likely covered by tattoos. However, parts of these tattoos remained but were severely damaged. The skin in those areas had been burned with hot objects, cut, and doused with acid. Nevertheless, by piecing together bits of the tattoos and comparing them with a database of missing persons, the police concluded that no one was looking for a woman with such features. This was odd, leading to the speculation that the deceased was not local. This remained the belief until a news report about the body was broadcasted, asking anyone who might recognize the described features to come forward. Soon after, a woman who appeared in adult films came to the station and said that based on the description of the tattoos, she recognized her colleague, who had disappeared in early January. The actress mentioned that the deceased worked under the pseudonym Charlotte, but she did not know her real name. This information proved crucial, as law enforcement now knew what the girl looked like in life, and they quickly established her identity and real name. The peculiar fiancé, as soon as the deceased's name became known, it was revealed that she had gotten engaged to her colleague, Salvatore Goldo, shortly before her disappearance, who, curiously, had not reported his fiancée missing. This led to the first suspect being found and detained. However, the man was clearly upset by the news of his beloved's demise and puzzled as to why he himself was under suspicion. According to Salvatore, he had kept in touch with the woman through messengers and social media, providing their correspondence as proof. Thus, he had no idea that Carol had long been deceased. He claimed that his beloved had contracted COVID-19 earlier in the year and was self-isolating, which is why he hadn't visited her. When police asked why he hadn't called her to check if she needed help, he said he had spoken by phone with Fontana, who was nearby and had promised to look after the woman. The fiancé's story was disjointed and unconvincing, but his testimony brought a second suspect into the case, who needed to be detained and interrogated. However, there was no need to search for David, as he himself turned up at the station the next day to report a person missing. The horrifying truth. Fontana, obviously, did not expect the body to be found so quickly, so he hadn't been following the news. When he learned that Carol had been found and identified, he became alarmed but still believed the detectives would not track him down. However, when the police arrested Salvatore, the man realized this person would lead law enforcement right to him, as they had communicated by phone, and he had concocted a story about COVID-19 promising to take care of his fiancée. David was visibly nervous, consistently contradicting his own statements, and the story he told was highly implausible. According to him, he and Carol had been very close, but they hadn't seen each other for several months, and she had stopped making contact. He couldn't explain why he had only contacted the police now. Under pressure, Fontana eventually began to testify, confessing that he had accidentally ended Carol's life. He claimed that in early January they were filming extreme content for a client who had paid a large sum. The script required David to bind the woman, tape her mouth shut, put a bag over her head, and then brutally beat, torture, and torment her using various tools, including a hammer. They had agreed that he would not hit her with full force, but she would act as if she were in severe pain. However, during the process, he supposedly went too far, misjudged a hammer blow, and fractured her skull. When he removed the bag from her head, he saw she was in death throes, but instead of calling for medical help or trying to assist her, he, out of mercy, decided to end her suffering with a final hammer blow. Then, the criminal, allegedly in a panic, dismembered the body but, unsure what to do next, simply stored the remains in his freezer for over 2 months before deciding to dispose of them, reconstructing the actual events. The investigation revealed that the mysterious, perverse client was Davide himself, who had contacted the woman using a fake account. Evidently, he didn't want to let her go, and devised a sophisticated plan of revenge because she had decided to leave him. Additionally, during the torture session, the man extracted the password to her phone, which supposedly was also part of the script and a client's whim. On January 11th, around 9 in the evening, Fontana ended the woman's life by fatally striking her with a hammer. The next day, he purchased a large freezer using the deceased's credit card, as well as a saw and an axe from a hardware store, which he used to dismember the body. He made every effort to disfigure the body to prevent identification. He removed the tattoos along with the skin, and what remained of them he tried to burn, shred, and literally erase. After that, Davide placed the body parts in bags and stored them in the freezer, where they remained for over 2 months. During this time, the criminal communicated with the victim's relatives and friends on her behalf, and also managed her social media, creating the illusion that Carol was alive. By the end of March, the criminal apparently thought the danger had passed, and decided to dispose of the body by dumping it off a cliff in a deserted area. He hoped that the remains would either never be found, or, by the time they would have decomposed to the point of being unidentifiable. However, Davide was mistaken, and the body was discovered just 2 days later, with authorities tracking him down within a week. Trial and verdict. The most bewildering and incomprehensible aspect of this case was that nearly 3 months after the girl's disappearance, none of her relatives or friends had reported her missing. They were all satisfied with the responses in messengers and posts on social media. Even the fiancé, who thought Carol was ill, was not alarmed by the fact that she didn't answer calls and never tried to visit her. If someone had raised the alarm, The murderer would have been tracked immediately via the signal from the victim's phone, which had been on and in Davide's possession all this time. At the trial, Fontana expressed remorse and swore that he loved Maltese and had taken her life unintentionally. He also claimed that he had planned to end his own life after her death, unable to cope with the grief. Naturally, such a statement sounded foolish, and nobody believed him, but the defense insisted that the incident was indeed an unintentional act of violence, despite the fact that the defendant himself had commissioned the recording of the brutal video. On June 12, 2023, the court found Fontana guilty of manslaughter and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay compensation to the deceased son in the amount of €200,000, as well as €100,000 to Carol's mother and €50,000 to the father of her child. Surprisingly, the manner of assassinating was not deemed cruel, and the dismemberment of the body was not considered an aggravating factor, so the criminal could potentially be eligible for parole. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.